Singer. Good evening, Mr. Singer. What would you like to tell us about your petition beyond that which we heard at the last meeting?
Thank you. Good evening. For the record, Andrew Singer, attorney in Dennisport, here on behalf of the applicant. With me at the table is Randy Hart from VHB, who's the project traffic engineer. Also with us, Randy and I will have presentations for you this evening to go over the supplemental materials that we submitted. The entire team is here for any questions you may have from a project engineer, hazardous materials, wastewater, everything. Everyone is here for any questions that you may have. Also with us this evening is Attorney Robert Chamberlain, who is the attorney for the property owners of the land in question, or for the main pieces of the land in question. Also with us is Nino Macosi, who is the proposed landlord, as well as the owner of the adjacent CVS, Wendy's, Advanced Auto Parts properties. So they're here as well with us this evening. We submitted to the board a supplemental submission which contained a number of materials. Specifically, we had a supplemental memorandum in there that I will go through. We also submitted a revised zoning analysis, which was the original analysis we gave you with a bunch of bolded language. We had met last week with Mr. Grills, the building commissioner, who is also in the audience this evening, as requested, and we honed down some of the changes on that list. So some of the things which you'll hear this evening were changes that the applicant has made, which changed the type of relief and reduced the type of relief needed. Others were, particularly as they regard signs, and there's a large section at the end of page 2 of that list that reflect the new sign code changes that were adopted at town meeting earlier this year. They are being reviewed by the Attorney General now. Several of those actually eliminate the need for some of the variances we had requested. So that's on that list as well. As for the proposal before you, we heard numerous questions and comments and requests from the board at the last meeting. And we have told you in the materials we submitted in writing. I feel like I'm getting feedback on this microphone here. In the materials that we submitted to you in writing, as well as in the oral testimony, we respectfully believe that this project will be a significant improvement and enhancement to the Aquifer Protection District in the town. In addition, after further exploration, after listening to comments from the board at the last meeting, the applicant is proposing an additional substantial enhancement and improvement. Specifically, as you know, regarding the existing Shell station and the existing Sunoco station that are on Station Avenue, those are proposed to have the fuel service eliminated and removed, decommissioned, from both properties, as well as the removal of all underground tanks, which total some 10 underground tanks at the moment. All of those are being removed, and the properties will be deed restricted against future fuel service use. Now, that's what we submitted to you last time. The additional information is that, and this is in response to a comment I think a couple of the board members made, is there a way to even further create a benefit for the Aquifer District? Those two sites, with the elimination of fuel service, are still pre-existing non-conforming sites that have hazardous materials use. They both have service stations, car rental. And so the applicant, Colby Enterprises, as I told you last time, owns the Shell site and will be operating that site. And so what we are proposing, or what the applicant is proposing, is that the existing Shell station, and the applicant owner is making this representation, and he's also making this representation on behalf of the owner of the Sunoco station property, which we have negotiated with and entered into a signed agreement for. They are both willing, as a condition of the board's approval of this project, to eliminate the remaining pre-existing non-conforming hazardous materials uses at their properties no later than 48 months after the new location opens for business. So what you will have is that when the new location opens for business, the gas service operations at both those gas stations will cease. And within 48 months thereafter, all non-conforming hazardous materials uses will be eliminated, and those properties, which will have to come back to the town for site plan review and for Board of Appeals, whatever it may need, will be reused and repurposed for conforming uses under the B1 zoning district. We submit that that is an additional, very significant benefit to the Aquifer Protection District. Not only will you be having one brand-new state-of-the-art modern gas station replacing two older, not state-of-the-art gas stations, you will also be eliminating the service uses and the other not now allowed in the APD uses that are on those properties. So you'll have the reduction in the fuel in the APD from 56,000 gallons down to 40,000. You will have all of the underground tanks being removed, and you'll ultimately have no hazardous materials uses on those sites. They're giving up, I think this was the term, I think one of you two gentlemen had mentioned it last time, they will be giving up their grandfathered status to have hazardous materials use. In addition, there was a request for additional review of the existing Shell station site, which my client does own. And so when those gas pumps and tanks and everything are taken out, obviously there's going to be significant disturbance to the earth at that site. And you asked what would be done to improve the aesthetics of that site. And so you have a sketch plan that we submitted that is...
Identify it for us.
It is a sketch plan by AUB Engineering, site sketch SK1, dated 6/20/19. It was in the packet of materials that I submitted for this supplemental submission.
Which page again?
It's SK1. It's a separate standalone sheet, Mr. Chairman, so it's not in, it should just, Mr. Igo has it.
I got it right here. Oh, you got it right there.
That's a new submission?
Well, it was with the supplemental submission that we gave you before, but
Okay.
it's a standalone 11 by 17 sheet.
When you're done with it? Okay, thank you.
What you will see when you look at this sketch plan is a significantly deepened front buffer along Station Avenue, which will be planted, as well as a perpendicular 20-foot wide additional new island that will go back into the property, creating a much more attractive and landscaped appearance to this property. And the parking spaces that you see there, it's all asphalt now. And so this shows the striping, and in that center part of the property and on either side of the curb cuts, you will have that significant new landscaping. Now this, as you know, and as we've stated, is an interim step prior to whatever the future redevelopment of that property will be, which will come back before the town. But we would submit that this is also a significant benefit aesthetically to the area in response to a question or questions that you had asked. Getting to the site itself, we had asked for a variance from the requirement to have 4 in-lot trees. And as you'll recall, there at the either end of the parking in front of the building, there were asphalt areas that were painted, but they were asphalt. And the question was, those would be areas, could you put in islands with in-lot trees? And the applicant has done that. So what you'll see on the revised site plan for this site is that, it's at the either end, as you can see on that plan, and it's on the plans that we submitted to you. There will be 2 new islands, one at either end, each with an in-lot tree. That's 2 in-lot trees. To the extent that none of the other trees that are around the parking qualify, we're still asking you for relief from the requirement to have 4. But there will be these 2 on site. And then while it is a separate property, we're proposing all of the additional landscaping at the Shell station across the street. As for the drive-through stacking, as you may recall, originally we were here, we had asked for relief. The requirement is to have 10 vehicle stacking. We had showed 8, asked for relief. What we have done to eliminate, in part, that relief is we are now showing on the plans you have 10 cars. We're not asking for any relief from the number of cars to be stacked. What we are asking for consideration of is that if, in the very unlikely event that all 10 cars were there, and the applicant does not believe that this will ever happen, but if it does, there are 3 parking spaces, just as you'll see to the north, where the last 2 cars would be, that would be blocked. We are asking for permission to designate those as employee parking.
Now, if I could, which parking, are you talking about the parking spaces behind the
No.
proposed?
No, these are, Mr. McCallie can show you.
These parking spaces right here, Al McCallie, Engineering, 1, 2, 3. This is the 10 car in the queue. These are the 3 spaces that we are behind. And your bylaw says that that queue cannot be behind the parking spaces. We'd like to make those 3 employee parking.
And so that part is something we do need relief for, that we're asking for, instead of the, not showing the cars. The, going through that memorandum, traffic is a significant consideration. I'm not going to discuss that, although I think you had a question.
So on your plan, and I don't see it designated, where does 10 cars end in the queue on the plan?
It's the last card that's shown.
The last car is.
Blocking the 3 proposed employees.
So it's coming out toward the pumps, in other words?
Yes.
Coming on, yeah. It's on the second sheet. I think it's the second sheet of the plan set we gave you.
C1.
C1.
Sheet C1.
It shows all 10 cars, and you'll see the parking spaces in
Oh, I
question.
see it. Okay. Thank you.
I only got old stuff. You only have the old stuff.
You want to show me on that same plan, where are we talking about in parking, in-lot trees?
That's on the landscape plan. Well, we can show you on the plan, but it's on the landscape plan. It's-
We're right, we're adding one in-lot tree right here. This was a
Oh, yeah.
park area beside the parking, so
Yeah.
we're gonna landscape that, we're gonna put a tree there.
Okay.
And on the other side, we're going to add a tree as well.
All right, we see that solid,
Yes, and then on the landscaping
Structure.
plan, you'll see that there's a tree
Sure.
proposed.
okay,
Okay.
thank you.
A question had come up just regarding stormwater, and you do have the stormwater O&M plan. If there are any questions about that, we'll be happy to answer them, but that does detail their design and operational controls for the stormwater. That's something they use at all their sites, and I know most of you have been to the dentist site, and you've seen that. As far as lighting,
State building, yes.
we reconfirmed with the building commissioner exactly what,
They just-
that we had asked, being conservative, we had asked for one piece of relief that we actually didn't need. So, as for lighting, the relief that we're requesting, and this is number 7 in the supplemental memo that I gave you, is for the driveway and perimeter lighting. Each of those is slightly over and somewhat over the foot candle limits at the edge of the property. And I go into this in detail in the memorandum, what we want the board to understand, the rationale for this and how the applicant is attempting to be respectful to the neighborhood and to provide safe lighting. They've met with their contractors and the lighting manufacturers, and given the commercial nature of the property and the use with fuel service and industry standards, the proposals that the lighting numbers, and I can go through them if you want, but the lighting numbers that are shown, they believe are what is needed for safe and efficient operations. They do not feel that those levels will result in any negative impacts. And by way of comparison for the board, if you go to the,
97.1.
if you've been to the Dennis Season site at night, the lighting there under the canopy is 45% greater than the lighting that is being proposed on these plans for the Yarmouth location. So just if you've been there, the lighting is almost half as bright, less, in Yarmouth than it currently is in Dennis, and it's not an issue in Dennis. And I realize the towns are different, but just by way of comparison for you, so you'll know in comparison. Now, if you also look at the mobile station that's 3-4 properties up here, we are also close to 6 foot candles less than the lighting there. And this lighting that's being proposed is less than at the Cape Farms Market on Route 28 in West Yarmouth. So when you're looking at the lighting relief we're asking, and when I say to you that we believe that that the industry lighting manufacturers said these are industry standards and are the minimums needed, in comparison, these are less than these other gas stations, 2 of them, the ones in Yarmouth that we've been discussing, and the one in Dennis significantly less. So we wanted you just
That's the other one.
keep that wanted to introduce that as part of our testimony as you consider the project.
22.
Regarding the signs, and we don't have to get into them in depth now, but as I noted, several of the signs, the LED pump toppers and some of the other signs were permitted. And we discussed this at the last meeting, that the board, because the Attorney General has not fully signed off on them, although it's retroactively back to town meeting approval,
7,300.
to the extent the board grants relief for those,
The extra
it ultimately
place.
won't be needed, because as soon as the Attorney General signs off, then everything's all set. So we can go through that if you want, but that's in-depth in the memorandum. Before turning it over to Randy to discuss traffic, because that is obviously a significant question for everyone, I wanted to discuss briefly, and this will be the boring part of the night, because I'm going to discuss variances and case law. except for maybe the two lawyers who are sitting up on the board. I think it's important, as we're going through, and I made this part of this argument, last time, but obviously it's very important because we are asking for variance relief in addition to special permit relief. And variances, as we all know, are sparingly granted. That's actually the term that the courts use in Massachusetts. They're all case specific. Now, that being said, there are a number of cases where variances are upheld where the hardship and the benefit merit it. What we ask the board to consider as you ultimately begin your deliberations, when we're all done with the testimony and hearing the public, is the following two cases which I believe do add further evidence and credence and support to the variance arguments that we're making to you. In the Furlong versus Salem Board of Appeals case, appeals court case from 2016, the court writes, quote, "The question whether a safety concern ameliorated by the granting of a variance qualifies as a hardship under Section 10 has not been extensively analyzed in our case law." They refer then, end quote, they refer to a Joseph's case, an older case that did grant one and was upheld. But that
Excuse me, let me interrupt you. Did you give us copies of these cases?
I will shortly.
Okay, why don't we have copies in front of us since you're asking us to consider the legal implications of the relief you're seeking tonight? I'm not sure we're going to make decisions based upon case law.
No, and I'm not asking you to make this decision on case law, Mr. Chairman. I only have one copy, but we will submit them for the record.
That's all right, I'll pass it up and down.
What
I'll
I,
accept-
and
I'll
and
accept
you don't
it as an
necessarily
exhibit.
need to look at them in depth right now.
And
What
I'm
I
going to accept it as an exhibit, okay?
Thank you.
And I think this is one, is it? Is that right?
might be one, there are two cases there, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if you want to do 1 and 2 or.
Okay. So I'm going to mark Furlong as one, Kavanaugh versus De Flamera, I guess.
I believe so.
The other.
Fumera.
They're both Mass Appeals Court cases. You guys take a look at them as you want.
And I'm just going to read a couple provisions from them, and again, just ask you to consider this not right now. Obviously, we have more substantive things we need to discuss as well, but because it's part of your deliberations when you get to your deliberations. And I think it speaks, both of them speak to the type of relief we're asking you for in this project, which is a complex amalgam of multiple properties and an overall improvement to an area. And the area, the harm we're seeking to reduce is the APD. We're seeking to protect the APD and reduce the harm there too. And in the Furlong case, the court writes, "We agree with the judge," this is the appeals court agreeing with the lower court judge, that, quote, "where a variance diminishes the risk of an existing harm or where it prevents a greater risk of harm that would result from compliance with a zoning ordinance, such a hardship may merit a variance. We also agree that the unique circumstances in this case and the degree of danger that would result from compliance with the zoning ordinance support the judge's finding of a hardship." In the applicant's case, what we're asking you to consider when you get there is that the elimination of the pre-existing non-conforming hazardous materials uses that are allowed on the other two properties and will continue on the other two properties because fuel service is needed in this area, will continue and won't be ameliorated, and won't be able to be ameliorated even if they're someday upgraded to the extent they can, to the extent that the applicant's proposing, because those sites just don't allow it.
So what are you citing that case to? The lighting issue?
No, the overall hardship on, we're asking for, there are different variance reliefs that we're asking for. One is use. The use of a gas station in the B1 zone is permitted by special permit. However, we're also in the APD. The use of a gas station in the APD is not allowed.
Okay, so what's the next variance relief you need?
The other relief after that are all dimensional. It's for the canopy.
How about the co-branding?
The co-branding is allowed by right.
3 businesses?
It's two. The motor, a permitted use in this zone is an H3 food store and an H10 eating and drinking establishment.
3 businesses at one location? Is
These
that
are not,
permitted?
this is the type, in this type of business, as you know from, where we all see it, these are, in the industry, recognized adjunct, almost co-businesses within.
Well, I don't know. I go into some of these facilities all around the Cape, and the one that comes instantly to mind is over on 151 in Mashpee, and I go in, and it's a gas station out front, and it's a pizza restaurant. and a Dunkin' Donuts, I think, and a convenience store. Aren't those 4 different businesses in one location?
I cannot speak to that site because I'm not
So let's
familiar with
speak
it.
about this site. What businesses are going to be in there?
Well, it's the same as you have, well, it won't be the same necessarily, but it's the same type as in Dennis. You have a gas station.
Yeah.
The Seasons business, the applicant, Colby Enterprises, runs Seasons Corner Market, which is a convenience store and a fuel service facility.
What else will be in the business
There will be
location?
the Seasons Corner convenience store, the gas station, and then you will have a co-brand business, which is typically a Dunkin', Mary Lou's, a coffee shop, bakery, co-junk, sometimes has been sandwich places.
Well, you're not suggesting that those are 2 businesses, though, are you?
I am not. I'm suggesting that this is all part and parcel of one property, one business, one.
Well, wait a minute. We have a gas station. Then we have a separate, I don't care that the company historically builds their restaurant, their facilities this way. I'm just asking because I want some clarity to this. Then we have a convenience store. And then we have a coffee shop that needs 10 stacking stacking aisle, a
Yes.
10 vehicle stacking aisle. Am I right on that?
You are correct. Now, how I would characterize those 3 aspects are 3 aspects of one business being operated on the property, as is customary under current modern standards.
Okay, it may be under current modern standards, but you understand that this isn't the only business that may want to seek this kind of relief in the future. And I think we need to clarify specifically what is here. I think that's very important to our dialogue here tonight.
Okay, well, what we have said, what we have listed for you in the revised zoning relief under paragraph 1 are all of the uses that are proposed, and I broke them down by what are allowed by special permit, what are allowed by variance, and what are allowed by what are permitted. So that's the same. That actually hasn't changed since the original submission.
No, that's fine, but isn't another component of the relief that you can only have 2 businesses in one location?
That is not something typically that this board has looked at, or when we've done the property next door, which has 6 or 7 businesses on, or 5 or 6 businesses, that was considered, Yarmouth allows business centers.
I'm not suggesting they
but-
don't. I'm suggesting, this isn't a business center.
No, it's not. There is the one business, which is one business as I see it, which is gas station convenience store. They're together, like all gas stations and convenience stores are these days. And then you have the co-brand business. I don't see it as 3 separate businesses.
Okay. Then we'll have some dialogue on that later.
Yeah,
but let's
absolutely.
move on.
Yeah, and if there's additional work or research you'd like on that, we can certainly discuss that
No,
with you.
I just want to make sure that if we grant the relief that is being sought in this instance, are we creating a new definition of co-branded businesses? And frankly, I think what you're asking us to do, without asking for additional relief, is to ask us to change our zoning bylaw as it relates to co-branded businesses. Because I think that there are actually 3 businesses being conducted here, 3 very separate and distinct businesses being conducted here, a gas station, a convenience store, and whatever that coffee shop or pizza, fast-paced pizza, or whatever that may turn out to be, fast delivery pizza. I don't really care what the business is, it's a separate business. And to say that they're one business because they happen to be in the same location is, I think, contrary to what I understand co-branding to mean within our bylaw. And so I'm concerned, are we redefining a bylaw by the relief we grant in this instance? Please understand, I'm not saying that I think it's a wrong thing to do to grant relief in this instance, but I don't see where the relief has been requested to grant relief on the co-branding of the 2. Do you agree with me that co-branding under our current bylaw allows for 2 businesses at one location in this instance?
I'd have to pull up the zoning bylaw to look at didn't bring it with me, actually, which I think I almost never not do, but I didn't tonight. There is...
Like my book?
I am happy to look at it. There's the discussion about singly occupied centers and, thank you, business centers. I don't think that co-brand is specifically, if you look, it's mostly under signs. You know, where you have the singularly occupied business property, and then you have the business center property. And again, what I'd ask you to consider, and we can go into this, Mr. Chairman, if you want, what I'd ask you to consider is, when you think of the existing Shell station, You have a station there, you have a small convenience store, and you have a service station.
They
Are those
sold
three
bubble gum in the-
businesses?
Come on, they sold bubble gum in the Shell station.
And then the Cape Farms Market that I think you permitted redevelopment a few years ago, there is a Cape Farms convenience store and a gas station.
That's right, two
there.
businesses, yeah.
Okay. And I don't know that you looked at probably, and I don't know, we could check it out, but in my experience, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, it's a matter of interpretation, something we may have to look at. I have not been faced with a situation where the type of use that's being proposed on this property has been considered three separate businesses.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's move on from it. If you're satisfied you've asked for relief, we'll take the relief that you're asking for into account. That's all.
To the extent the board feels additional relief is required, we can certainly amend the application to provide for that, but that's something we can certainly discuss.
Okay.
The other, and I won't read all of it, but I just point you to, when you look at the Kavanaugh versus De Flumera decision, that is one in which the court discussed the prong of variances that you cannot derogate from the intent and purpose of the bylaw. And it found that when you grant a variance, you're always derogating to some extent, and so the question is it substantial or not? And so they were using that as part of their analysis of looking at variances. So when we get to that stage, I'd ask you to consider both of those cases in light of the request for relief that's before you. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hart, who's going to discuss the traffic study that was submitted, and then I also know Mr. Stephen Tupper from the Cape Cod Commission, who did peer review for traffic, is here as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good evening. I'm Randy Hart. I'm a principal with VHB. We are the transportation consultants on the project.
Could you pull your mic a little more in front of you,
I
sir?
sure could.
Thank you.
Is that a little better?
Well, it's not so much me hearing it or the board hearing it, it's the people at home.
Okay. Informed by the Cape Cod Commission peer review letter, which was issued on April 24th, we have modified, expanded the initial traffic study that was prepared and submitted to the town. I'm just going to touch on several aspects of it as well as some findings here tonight, and certainly available for questions thereafter. The study area first was one thing that was expanded under the request. We have expanded to include two signalized intersections, White Path to the north and Old Townhouse Road to the south. We did additional counts at those locations as well as all the study area intersections during three critical periods. It's those periods when the combination of site traffic coupled with traffic on the road is at its most critical level. Those periods include 7 to 9 a.m. on a weekday, 4 to 6 p.m. on a weekday, and 11 to 2 on a Saturday. We also did operational analyses for all of those locations for all three periods as well, and we did it under peak summer conditions so that we could model exactly what happens in the worst time of the year on this corridor. One of the other things that was brought up in the Commission peer review letter was traffic generation and question as to whether or not the land use category we used include the coffee brand in the projections. What we did was we went back and we did some alternative projections based on different land use codes in the ITE manual, one of which called out very specifically the coffee use with drive-through. And when we compared what we projected in the original study to the alternative projection, showed that our projections were higher than the alternative projection, which called out coffee brand specifically. But we took it a step further. We actually went to an existing Seasons brand facility up in Lakeville, which has very similar characteristics to what's proposed here. We chose Lakeville because it's on Route 105, and it happens to be directly across from a major commuter rail station with hundreds and hundreds of parking spaces. So we knew it would be a busy location because of the commuter activity that exists there. When we look at the actual counts that we gathered in the field in Lakeville and compared them to the projections we made in the initial traffic study, it showed that the projections made in the original traffic study were higher, again, than the empirical data we collected in the field. In fact, the AM peak hour was 60 trips higher based on the projection than what we counted in the field at Lakeville. The evening peak hour was 55 trips higher in the projection than what we counted in Lakeville. So based on all of that, it was clear to us that using the ITE projections that were initially provided to you results in a conservative assessment of project traffic increases, with probably overstating what we would expect to see based on that supplemental analysis. One thing to note about this type of use, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but this type of use really draws from existing traffic activity that's on the road today. It doesn't necessarily bring people from their homes to the facility. To some degree it does, but to a much larger degree, it utilizes the traffic that's already on the road. That traffic is called pass-by. If you're not familiar with the term, what it means is somebody's already on Station Avenue, they're moving north or south, they use the opportunity to stop, get gas, to get a convenient item, or to get coffee. But they're already on a trip going from one place to another, not to the facility directly. They just happen to stop because they're there. The ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers manual, gives ranges for pass-by activity at this specific type of site. They say that 52 to 73% of the activity at these facilities, all activity at this facility, is related to pass-by. For the purposes of the assessment we put forward and submitted to you, we use the lower end of that projection, the 52%, not the 73. So we wanted to offer another layer of conservatism in our analysis, so that's exactly what we did. While we were in Lakeville, we used that opportunity to also do some observations as to queue storage at the drive-thru, the coffee brand. We wanted to know exactly what was happening at a very similar type of site. So during the AM peak hour, our person in the field basically saw that the average queue during the morning peak hour, which is the critical period for the coffee brand, the average queue was about 3 vehicles. The maximum queue that was observed during that entire time frame was 8 vehicles. During the afternoon peak hour, which is much less as you would expect activity-wise, the average was about 1.5 vehicles with the max queue at 5. So us providing storage for 10 vehicles says to us that we're more than adequate to meet the demands that we would expect on most normal days.
Then why would relief be needed? If it's a comparable site and it never exceeded 8, why is relief needed?
It's a matter of caution to provide a little bit of flexibility. Things change. There are busy days for busy reasons, and we want to have a little extra flexibility. That's all it is to it. We don't want to meet the number. If we have 2 extra spaces and we never use them, that's a wonderful thing. But if we need them one day, we'd like to have them.
And what we'd be doing with that is designating those 3 impacted parking spaces, if 10 were there, as employee parking, so you wouldn't have customers going in and out.
But that was a good idea, to be honest with you. I think that was very creative of all of it.
So the next thing I just want to touch on is traffic operations. We assessed operations at all of the study area intersections and the site driveway, including the Stop and Shop driveway, during the critical periods that I've already mentioned. If you look at the results in the study that we provided to you, at the signalized intersections, the impact of the project really doesn't have a lot. The changes in delay are very minor, and so you really don't see a lot of influence. But what you do see, and what you would expect along this corridor, or any corridor, a major corridor on Cape Cod during summer conditions, you would expect that left turns out of unsignalized streets or driveways is a very difficult thing to do. And the analysis shows that. The Cape Cod Commission pointed it out, and I've seen correspondence from neighbors that have pointed that out as well. So there's no denying the fact that left turns are very, very difficult on Cape Cod, particularly on busy corridors. I can tell you that level of service F is what we see at both of the driveways of the Seasons Market under peak summer conditions. So for 10 weeks of the year, during those peak hours, you're going to see a queue on the driveway. You're going to see some delay. There's no question about it. The same is true of every other driveway along this corridor and all the other busy corridors on Cape Cod. But one thing we wanted to do...
Can I stop you there?
Sure.
So, I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but it's just such fascinating information you're giving us, and I don't want to miss it. When I go up to the next gas station up the road, was that a mobile site?
Yeah.
And so they have a rear entrance that allows them to come around onto the traffic light.
Right.
And utilize a traffic control device to get out onto the road. Has there been any contemplation about a traffic control device here that also assists, that would help to assist those people exiting the Stop and Shop plaza to make a left-hand turn to go out of their plaza towards downtown, or more towards the Yarmouth?
Yes, there has. Actually, we did do a traffic signal warrant evaluation at the northern project driveway, which is in alignment with the Stop and Shop driveway, and it shows that during peak summer conditions that a traffic signal is warranted. There are 3 warrants that are all met: the peak hour warrant, the 4-hour warrant, and the 8-hour warrant. So it does say that signalization could be considered at this intersection. It does. However, and it's not really a however, but the interesting part of the discussion is that if you look at what's driving the need for the signal, The Stop and Shop driveway is a heavier volume driveway, and the side streets are usually what drives the need for a traffic signal. So it's the Stop and Shop volume that's really driving the need for the signal, but
Be the same problem for people exiting this location.
absolutely.
Doesn't matter what the volume is, it's the exact
Absolutely.
same difficulty
It is.
for people exiting this
It is.
location.
Absolutely.
And while it's helped by that third middle lane, right-left turn, it certainly isn't abated, because the traffic now is backing up from the light down to the Stop and Shop entrance
Yep.
on many occasions, on a Saturday, even out of season.
I agree.
So, I mean, what, you did the traffic study. What's your conclusion about a traffic light controlling that intersection?
I have mixed feelings about it, honestly. When you introduce a new signal, mid-block of two signals, then, you're introducing potential delay to the north-south movement in an area that doesn't exist today. So you have to weigh that against
Safety.
you have to weigh it against safety, and you have to weigh against the need, The Stop and Shop is, the thing about the Stop and Shop is, it's driving the need for the signal, but they have the ability to use a signal to make that very left turn by going out the northern driveway. And so there's a balance to be drawn there.
And and again, we have one other site location. This will be the only site location, forget the medical facilities complex. This will be the only site on this road that does not have access on egress, exit out, that isn't controlled by more than one entryways.
Yeah.
More than one entryways, or a traffic control device, with the exception of the existing shell.
Well, there is also everything that's coming out of the Dunkin' Donuts, everything that's coming out Forsyth Avenue is
I'm
one
glad you
way
raised
over
that
in
one,
half.
because I want to go left there on every occasion I exit a facility behind Dunkin' Donuts. And every time I try to go left, I can't do it. I've got to go right, and then cut through the CVS parking lot to get over to the road I want to get to.
But just to add, so to your point, there are a number of them that don't have that. There are a number that do.
Right.
But there are a number that don't have that multiple egress option. There are some that we've been discussing, but there are many that don't.
Okay. The other gas station and former gas station certainly do. I'm not talking about the Shell, I'm talking about the gas station to the,
The Mobile does, and the Sunoco has, it's really close to that intersection, but yes, it comes out right at the traffic light.
no, they also have two exits out of that parking lot.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
On Old Town House.
Oh, yeah, so what I'm just saying is they're really close to the light. You're right, they're there, but.
Okay. Okay, I'm just wondering why that hasn't been a component of at least a portion or of an option for us to consider, because I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, but I bet you dollars to donuts you're going to hear concern from every member of this board tonight about left-hand turns out of the station.
As you would hear about left-hand turns out of every single property along that street.
Except we now have two opposing entrances and exits from directly opposing entrances and exits.
Interestingly, we didn't originally, but site plan review asked us to make them right across the street from each other.
Okay, no, that's fine, but my point is being that that's where they are. And if you remember the bank location, when they tried to make changes to the bank location, they required a retrafficking of that whole location at the corner of Station Ave. They reconfigured it so you had to leave, if you're going to leave the window, the stacking window, you have to go into the parking lot and down through the parking lot in order to get back out.
Correct.
I mean, I just think it would behoove us to talk about something that is reasonable in terms of resolving, and we're going to hear from the Cape Cod Commission in a moment, and I'm very interested in what they have to say. But this is a very great concern to me, how a vehicle's going to get out there safely. And because we all know that when people are in a hurry, they take great risks. And that's a very, very busy traffic corridor. Once they leave that light what is that? I'm sorry.
White's Path?
White's Path. Once they leave that light, they want to scream down that road as fast as they can, because they've just come off a highway and they're upset about having to sit in a traffic line for a bit, and now they want to get going when they get on a Station Ave. And they get going fast. And now to have cars exiting left from this location, I think is a real issue for me, at least.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfectly. I understand completely. And, The one advantage we do have for us is that the center turn lane is helpful. It gives them a center refuge that wouldn't exist on most roads. So it is helpful, but it doesn't solve the issue completely. I totally agree. But one thing I want to touch on is if you look at the results in the traffic report of the driveway volumes and the operations, you know, we have a level service F during the peak summer condition. Absolutely, no question about it. But if you look at the delay in the queues, the thing that you probably don't know, and I want to make sure you do, is that the operational analysis that we do is highly, highly conservative. It's well known in the industry to be highly conservative. And so I didn't want to just tell you that. I wanted to demonstrate that to you. So what we actually did was we went out on April 29th, I think it was, and we had a person sit at the Stop and Shop driveway where we would be. We had him sit there from 4 to 6 p.m. and to actually measure the queues that existed on the Stop and Shop driveway. That 4 to 6 period is particularly busy for Stop and Shop, as you probably know. What the results of that sort of observation said was that the average queue on that egress was about 1.5 vehicles, and the max was 5, or 125 feet if you assume 25 foot per vehicle. That's what we physically observed in the field at that moment. We then went and performed operational analyses based on the same methodology we used in the study for volumes specific to that same April timeframe. And the analysis results suggest that there would be 14.8 vehicles waiting in a queue, or a queue of 370 feet. So what that essentially shows you is that the analysis is assuming a queue that's 3 times as much as what we actually visited in the field. And it just it confirms exactly what I said, that the analysis is very, very conservative.
How many times was that 4 to, what'd you say, 4 to 6 times?
It was from 4 to 6 is the time
How many
frame.
times was that done?
How many times was what?
How many different days?
It was done in one day.
Just one day.
Just as an example. That's all it was.
Okay.
April and July are different.
Oh, absolutely. The middle of July would be totally different, but the point being is that whether it's April, whether it's January, or whether it's August, the differential between what's observed versus what the analysis shows will be the same ranges, because it's just, we're required to input very conservative input parameters in the analysis, and it shows in the results at unsignalized intersection. That's the only point I'm trying to make.
Okay, thank you.
So, final thing I'll mention is the commission had asked that we look to implement some levels of traffic demand management as part of this plan. So we have brought in some of that to the program. What we have right now is that the site will designate a TDM coordinator, somebody on site, an employee who will be responsible for implementation of the project and selling it, if you will, to employees. We know that we would have a carpool rideshare program with guaranteed ride home for any employees that would be willing to participate. We've added some bike racks to the facility, assuming that someone would like to bike to the facility. One of the things about the proposed use, it's sort of an inherent TDM initiative in and of itself, in that any employee that works there has the ability to have breakfast, lunch, they can have snacks, they can fuel up their car, they can get their coffee. There's a lot of things they do while there that is just inherent to the place they are. And so there are some TDM initiatives built into the program by way of those things. So that's a really quick summary of a lot of information. I didn't want to take more time, but if there are questions regarding what I've said, or maybe the areas that I didn't cover, I'm happy to try and address them as the night continues. Thank you very much.
Sure, of course, please.
Just so the people at home understand, how many cars travel on that road per day?
$25,000 on a weekday.
Mm-hmm. And that was your April study?
That was based on November, December ATR count, automatic traffic report.
So
count.
25,500 cars. Thank you.
Sure, let's go from one end or the other. So, Mr. Neitz, do you have questions?
Sure, I just had one about, I think in the traffic report, it mentions the numbers of motorcycles and bicycles. And I wasn't surprised that there weren't many bicycles or motorcycles in November and December and January. But there's a new facility on that road diagonally across the street that's attracting considerable numbers of bicycles. Do you have any numbers or projections from the state as to what kind of numbers they're expecting at that trailhead of the Cape Cod Rail Trail? And what percentage of those bicycles are going to leave the bike trail in search of water or snacks or food or bicycle repairs or whatever?
Good question. We did a lot of, VHB did a lot of the work on the bike trail. I'm sure there's some information available that I could gather. I don't have it. I haven't looked at it at this point, but I got to believe
Is it
some-
reasonable to assume, and I've heard this number bandied around, and I tried to get it confirmed today from town agencies, and nobody seemed to have the numbers either, but I've heard upwards of a couple of 100,000 people, not in a day, but using that bike trail during the course of a year.
Okay, I'm not sure.
And if that's concentrated in the summer months, I worry about the congestion that may cause in and of itself before your project is even there. So I think it needs to be factored in somehow for us to be able to take both into consideration for this project.
And that, Mr. Neitz, is actually, you raise a very good point as the board continues its deliberations, which is that, as we're all acknowledging, there are existing issues on a high-volume road here, whether it's from Stop and Shop to bike trail, whatever it is, those exist. This is the last undeveloped parcel of land in the B1 district here. It is my understanding that because those issues exist already on the roads, any business that would go into this property, you'd be having the same discussion that we're having with you. And so the question is, as we're looking at the existing issues that are on the street, how do we either help them, not, worse or whatever?
It's just as important to consider that our chairman's concerns about 3 businesses rather than 1 business. So, I mean, those are all,
Oh, yeah, these are all things that are, going to be discussing as you deliberate.
absolutely.
Mr. Martin, any questions of this portion of the presentation?
Yeah, in terms of the traffic light and consideration given to that, I noticed in the Seasons Corner Market's own paperwork that they said they would only put Seasons Markets at a signalized location, or at least that was their, at least at one point, their intent that it would only be signalized. And so I guess that's one thing I'm very, very concerned about in terms of, in looking at this. I don't see why this can't be arranged to close off a curb cut, have a circuitous route within the facility so that it comes out of the light, be safer and better for you, and certainly safer and better for the Stop and Shop. Another question I have in reading the traffic analysis as best as I could, it seemed to say there were only 4 accidents at this location in 5 years, because that that just flabbergasted me. I cannot, having seen at least 4 myself.
You happen to be there every day, Dick.
It gave, I think it was either a 4 or 5 year
Stop and Shop.
period, and at the southerly, and some of the accidents, to be honest with you, may be at the northerly curb cut that would be opposite the Today Real Estate and other cut there as well. And because I can't differentiate in my memory which of the 2 curb cuts, but there's constant accidents there. And the fact that it said there were only 4 there was like flabbergasted me. I just don't think that's right.
May I respond to that?
Yep.
So, a couple things. First, the records that we got were from Mass DOT, and so when they specify it's at the intersection, it goes in the table at the intersection. That doesn't mean that there wasn't an accident in very close proximity to the Stop and Shop driveway, and/or the Stop and Shop driveway wasn't a part of the cause of the accident. It just means that it was at that intersection directly. As part of the commission letter, they did ask for analysis of accidents along the entire corridor between the signalized intersections, which is something that we supplemented and provided, and it did show,
There were quite a few more at the
absolutely.
at the signalized intersections, actually.
Just to be fair, unless it's specified geocoded right at the intersection, it wouldn't make it into the table at that
that's
location.
5 years.
But it could very well be, 20, 30, 40 feet.
In all fairness, a lot of that might be at the northern driveway in terms of what I've been seeing. I think that's probably a more likely a location with the other curb cut across from it that accidents are occurring there. I mean, it's just a very, there's some pros certainly to a 3-lane setup there, and there are certainly a lot of negatives to that 3-lane setup. It's great, if you want to turn into a driveway on the left and you're heading north toward the highway, then that gives you an opportunity to get out of the traffic flow and potentially turn. It becomes more of a nightmare if you're turning out of a site like Seasons would be, trying to go north, it would, you have to get across the traveling traffic in the main lane and potentially other turning traffic that might be in that middle lane or whatever. So signalization, in my estimation, should really be looked at very, very, very seriously at the site. And then that would close a curb cut, that would allow other, that would allow you to come in to conformity better with some of the other things that you're looking for relief from. Was any consideration given to any improvements in the canopy? I know that was talked about by at design review and with Kathy and so forth. She gave many examples of other canopies that had been done within Yarmouth that had pitched roofs, or hip roofs, and cedar shingles and so forth. And excuse me. At least in my eyes, what would be a better looking plan for a canopy than what I'm seeing. If we're looking for relief in terms of the setback here, and in other words, a lot of this is, again, the problem of trying to get too much in too small a site. And when we look at this canopy, and I look at other canopies in town that have listened to design review and others within the community to design something that's more attractive, I'd like to think that was looked at. I know this company has a way they like to do things, but a flat-roofed, yellow-lined canopy doesn't do anything for me, to be honest with you. So I'd like to think that maybe you give more consideration to that.
If I might respond, Mr. through the chair. We did look at that. I will note again in the documents you have, the design review committee did vote 3-0 in favor of the canopy that's before you. So the town's designated body did officially endorse the canopy that's here. So I appreciate the comments Mr. Martin's making, and I do believe that while the canopy is not changed, there were some discussions about possibly looking at some of the columns, and I can ask, how do you want to address that? So we did look at that, Mr. Martin, as a way to, not the canopy itself.
Columns, impediments, something that'll make it look a little better than it
If we can have
does.
Mr. McCallie could address that, Mr. Chair.
If I can approach the board.
Of course. Yeah, you want to bring a microphone with you, though, please?
There's actually, Al, there's a
No, not to me,
portable
not
one.
to see, not to the board, but as you're going to speak, please use a microphone.
I'll just,
Exhibit B.
This is 3.
3.
Are you going to pass one of these to everybody? There we go. Why don't we pass them? Why don't we take out the clip?
I don't mean to give you too, extra work to do, it's, I know. Really what we looked at was trying to dress up the canopy columns at the base, similar to what you see over at the Cape Farms location. We would use a stone that matched the building, so it would tie it in architecturally, and aesthetically, we thought that would be an enhancement.
It does look nice over there at Route 28. It's stacked.
My feeling is an improvement, but it doesn't do anything up above where I'd be most concerned. Another question in terms of the buffers and how they're compromised. I mean, we have the retention, I don't know what you call them, beds, whatever, both in the back and on the side there, that are in the buffer. The buffer is supposed to be, that 10-foot buffer is supposed to be untouched with the trees left, and yet it shows the retention areas going right pretty much to the lot line, and maybe a couple of trees planted on the shoulder of it, I guess. It would seem to me that might be something else you would need to be asking for relief for, because buffers are supposed to be buffers, they're supposed to be untouched where possible, and these are being compromised dramatically. And I mean, if you could show that you can plant trees there on the side sloping part of that retention, what's the word?
Retention pond?
Pond, I guess. Then I'd be comfortable with that. But I think that's something that needs some additional relief that maybe has not been considered. Because I don't believe buffers are supposed to be compromised for the slope of the retention ponds.
We can certainly look at that again. I will say that through our consultations with the building department and the zoning officials and site plan review, that was not raised as a zoning issue that the board needed to look at. I can certainly look at it again, though. Thank you.
I have lots of other things to say, but that's all I have for questions now.
Mr. Igo?
Yes, and I'd just like to talk about the possibility of putting a light right here across from Stop and Shop, and Well, the first question that I have is, I'm not sure that this board has the authority to make that a condition. I think the town, Mr. Singer, I'd ask you, or Steve, your opinion on this, but I'm not quite sure that the Board of Appeals can mandate a traffic light on Station Ave. I think that what I've seen in the past is, I think the selectmen have to weigh in on that. I think that would have to go through the highway department.
Well, don't you need relief because of the proximity of the curb cuts? Or no?
Yeah, but I'm just saying,
That is
for
some of
us
the relief we
to,
have,
for us
we've
to
applied to
make a,
you.
if we were,
Need that as well, yeah.
I
It
think
would
if
have
we
to
were
be subject to
inclined make-
approval by the Board of Selectmen, that's all.
Yeah,
Now, there are, we did look at the light on site. There's also, challenges, even if you had a light, let's say you hypothetically had one, you have to have the ability on the property itself to be able to line up for it, and that becomes, and Al could speak to this, that becomes very challenging, and Randy can, with the canopy and the type of
Directly
use. There's no way to line up cars, even
Right.
if you had a light. Putting aside cost and all that.
okay. I was just gonna ask you your opinion as to if we asked for that as a condition, would you be opposed to it? And I can see by the plan that you have there that it may not work on that site.
Yeah, so to answer,
I'm missing that. How does it not work? You're going to have cars that are going to be going left that are going to stack at that location.
Yeah, but they'll stack up
So-
into a,
They'd have to stack
this-
along the buffer in the
This is the Stop and Shop Drive, which our driveway was originally here, which was where we would like it to be, but we moved it to align with Stop and Shop to minimize conflict points. But by doing so, we then don't have any real stack in room here. These are the fuel pumps, so somebody could be sitting here and here, and this would only allow one or two vehicles to queue up, waiting for a signal cycle. So it's just not an ideal situation to accommodate a traffic signal with this configuration.
And so, to answer, Mr. Chairman, to answer Mr. Igo's question, you can condition things, but, the issue we're looking at, and we're asking you to look at, and that the town's looking at, is we have an existing situation on a road, and if there's something that should be upgraded, whether it's whatever that is, I don't know. We can only really deal with this site, and, can't solve all the issues of, and you're not asking us to, solve all the issues of Station Avenue. It's a matter of how we can propose something which we believe, which is proposed, will be safe and will operate as well as every other business on the site, in the road, recognizing that there, at certain times, 10 weeks of the year, there are going to be issues with
I
less.
mean, in the past, we did have the Shaw's Supermarket that came in front of us some years back, and the proposal was that the Davenport company really sunk a lot of money into the infrastructure there and redesigned and put a light in there across from Piccadilly Deli. Of course, it is correct that they had the ability to queue up the cars to get out there onto Route 28, and looking at this particular site, I'm not quite sure that you have the ability to do that, unless you were going to eliminate those first two pumps right there, but I don't know if you can do that.
Not and have an economic project that's going to proceed.
Yeah, I know, I hear you, I hear you. Again, I have sat over there myself and did my own traffic study. So
Being a lawyer's
I
not
will
just
tell
enough for you, huh?
I thought, let me go over there and sit over there in the Stop and Shop parking lot at a somewhat busy time, and let me see how it looks. And I did see a lot of cars having difficulty getting out, taking left-hand turns. And it's not your fault, and I don't think we're saying that it's your fault. I don't think anybody is. It's just what it is on that road right there. I'm not sure if that center lane helps you or hurt you, Chip, because it takes you that much further to get into the travel lane that you're trying to get out of there and go. And people on the Cape aren't generally used to seeing those. You see them in Florida, people get used to them and they work them and they get comfortable with them. But
And
here,
Some people use them as travel lanes for
Right.
hundreds of feet,
yeah. But though, I did notice in my own study that it was very difficult at times for people to get out there and take that left. So I just see coming out of your driveway there and people trying to take a left, or even people trying to take a right there, preventing people from coming out of Stop and Shop to take a left. So I just think it might be a problem there. So I do agree that that will be an issue. Whether that's a make or break issue, I don't know.
Well,
But-
can I just weigh in on the
Sure.
traffic light issue just for a minute?
Yeah.
Because whether we have the capacity to tell them to do it or not, and whether or not our telling them to do it or not is the final end-all word on it, we certainly have the capacity to say to them, with respect to your two curb cuts, one can be an in only and one can be an out only.
That could be.
Okay?
That could be.
Because that's exactly what we did down at the drugstore, what's the-
Walgreens.
Walgreens. We made the 28 exit in, entrance in only, and then they had an outside egress and ingress at the other end of the parking lot. But I don't know why we can't do that. So when we talk about, that wouldn't be a reasonable solution, because ultimately, that's going to cause them to have a difficulty with anybody that isn't intending to go down Station Ave to the, whatever that is, the south, I guess. Where's my compass?
Well, depending on, that's north, this is south.
That would be south. So, you know, if they had an in at the first curb cut and an out only at the second curb cut, I guess that's not really south, but southerly, southeast, southwesterly.
Southerly.
That we could do, and I'm very confident and comfortable that we could do it.
That
Wouldn't
we
it
could
be-
do, yeah.
It would be considered appropriate and reasonable to try to protect the public safety aspect of this.
So you'd have no left
Conversely,
turn.
we could recognize that they would benefit from a traffic light here controlling the egress from the parking lot, the exiting from the parking lot, and making the second one left turn, right-hand
Right
turn
turn
only.
only.
And before I pass it on, because I know other people have comments, can you tell me what is the difference between this and what I saw on SG2, sheet SG2?
The stone at the base. See these stacked stone?
Oh, okay, all right, I got you.
Thank you.
Those are pretty.
They do look nice, yeah.
All right, Mr. Nicanello.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So your new curb cut configuration is, to me, a little complicated. How is the goods transferred from your distribution center to your site? Is it a 40-foot tractor trailer with a 20-foot cab? And I can't see that vehicle making that corner. Is he gonna go across Station Avenue like the Dunkin' Donuts over here and then try to back up into the property and hold everybody up? How does that scenario work to me?
All right, so we have, so the truck can come down and enter this driveway here. He positions at the tank mat, and then he exits this driveway.
Okay, so not talking about the gasoline truck, the one that's carrying all the candy bars. Well, how does that work?
They would enter this driveway, they would circulate up to the site. The loading is done from this spot here. So if we had small box trucks or other deliveries to the store itself, they would park here, they would wheel the product up the ramp into the building, and they would exit around the building and go up this driveway.
So you're saying there's no 40-foot tractor trailer carrying Hershey bars?
I'm not sure the size of the tractor trailer
Oh.
or the truck that delivers.
So
the
there could be.
But they could be. We ran, just for safety purposes, we ran the town's fire truck, the aerial ladder, through the site. And we were able to bring that truck in that driveway and out this driveway. We are
Right.
also able to bring that truck in and around the site and out this driveway. So if we had to bring a larger vehicle to bring, product to the store, we could get them around the building and out of the site.
That being said, Mr. Nicanello, I was looking back at Mr. Delacapini as the president of the company. He was saying they do not have those larger size delivery vehicles. And as Mr. McCallie said, the fuel service trucks and the fire trucks, the biggest what the town has, can get through. But from a delivery, the Hershey bars, to your example, they come in smaller vehicles.
Well, my comparison was the coffee shop right up the street next to the church, where,
That's 30,
again, you
so-
have a facility on a site that's too small for what it's doing, Dunkin' Donuts. And the delivery person, which is always constantly rotating, it's never usually the same person, always approaches the store in a different way. Sometimes they back in off of Forest, sometimes they back in off of 28. Okay, so there's no consistency in how that vehicle works. I get the gas has to go that way, and if the gas tanker pulls in there, there's gonna be congestion for people trying to come in or come out. I can just see that happening now, because people freeze, okay? So I was just wondering about the goods and services vehicle that's coming to the facility. So if there's no 40-foot vehicle, well, I guess that cuts down because that's an awful mean right turn for a 60-foot vehicle. So, and besides, my next one was the Dunkin' Donuts on Station Avenue is more than 10 cars sometimes. Sometimes that facility has way too many cars. Again, it's a great business. I own many businesses myself, and I love business, but sometimes they don't fit where they want to go, okay? And that facility, again, is kind of small for the parcel that it's on. And there is a problem with the cars trying to get into the facility and the cars that are in the stacking lane. But it's off to the side of Station Avenue. It doesn't really present a problem. The only problem is trying to make a left. Some people can't do that, but we all know that.
Can I ask you something that if you guys even might have considered this, and you probably didn't, because I know you're looking for the in and out both ways, but if you took your northerly driveway and you made it right in and right out, okay? Can't take a left coming out of there. We take your southerly driveway after you come out of the donuts, and we allow you to take a left out of there. So the only left-hand turn is on your southerly exit. You can't take a left from being the one in the north.
It's contrary.
And that would assist with any stacking issues because of backup getting out. You have a lot of area to stack there.
Yeah.
I have one more question.
You could fit 5 or 6 cars there. The worst time at Stop and Shop, which is a much bigger
We could
plaza.
fit 20.
You know, you've got a lot of stackability right there.
That is something that, you know, we can consider, and if I can, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Nicanello's response, Mr. Delacarpini just mentioned that their standard typical truck is a 26-foot box truck. And this site is, which many of the older sites don't have, there is the designated loading area. So there's
Right.
actually a place where the truck can come in,
Yeah.
park, be out of the travel lane, be out of the parking, be out of everything, and then, as most commercial sites, walk across and go into the store. So those are also benefits.
That's all good news.
Yeah.
I did have one other question. The traffic study went from Old Townhouse to White's Path, correct?
Yes.
And you have 3 different categories equaling over 5 years, over 60 accidents. So nothing north of White's Path, which is really the whole headache of Station Avenue. Okay? Over on Exit 9, they used to have a policeman every morning until the cloverleaf went in. Now, in the height of July and August, when you get a left-hand traffic accident, some vehicle wants to go east on Route 6 coming off of Station Avenue going north, and there's a problem there. That doesn't get resolved right away. The emergency responders come, they hold everybody up, and next thing you know, the traffic is down by the schools. Okay? So in my mind, I've driven Station Avenue all my life. The only way to get rid of that congestion is to add the other cloverleaf to Exit 8. You're always going to have a problem, no matter you have a traffic light or whatever you're going to do, until those people don't take a left to go east on Route 6, it's always going to be a bottleneck. And I bet over the last 5 years, your 60 that you have on those 2 accidents is just a small amount of the amount of accidents that happen at those 2 entrances to go on the Mid-Cape Highway.
Well, I can confidently say that if that's one of your conditions, the project won't proceed.
I'm just saying, Station Avenue is never going to get relief until our legislators and our town people and the people who drive get that cloverleaf on Exit 8. It's going to be safer for everybody.
There's no other forum for the 6 of us to voice our concerns.
That is fine.
Bringing into the 21st or 22nd century the town of Yarmouth. So this is it. Let him say his piece.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm not complaining.
Mr. Barron.
I'm going to pick up on what Mr. Nicolau was describing and about access. And the diagram in the new submission shows how the fuel truck would come into and exit the site. But the idea of having that same kind of trace, to show what a large delivery semi to reach that loading area, that kind of trace would be most helpful. And I doubt if it could be really realistically shown here. My point, after that, has to do with the way that you have defined the problem only between White's Path and Old Town House Road. You've got the Stop and Shop driveway, their south driveway shown with a stop sign, but there's a north exit from the Stop and Shop area, which generates its own amount of traffic. And it is opposite the access to the real estate office and the medical facilities on the other side. So I think that your definition of traffic configuration is short-sighted. And the point brought up about the Exit 8 and its generation of traffic and backups is equally, should equally be a consideration of any traffic study on the site, or near the site, near this proposed site. So I also went through the traffic study, looking at before and after, looking at the conditions that were described as the initial conditions without your site being involved, and then further into the report with your site showing its generation of and contribution to the numbers. And what struck me was you'd think that the input of numbers at the Old Townhouse Road, or the input of numbers at the workshop, at the White's Path intersection, would be similar. I mean, within 10, 15, maybe 20, but in some cases, I'm seeing as much as 400 counts different. And it raises a question in my mind: are these numbers valid? Are they really showing us a true picture? Something is missing when you look at initial conditions and then look at studied conditions and come up with 200, 400 or more variants as to the input at the extremes of the envelope that you're trying to study. So I question how all these numbers actually add up. And so in that sense, the question I have is that it was good to get a second study, a second analysis from the first one, but it didn't go far enough. And it didn't show these other, although minor, entrances, the second entrance from the Stop and Shop, and the other shops and facilities near the bank, and the input from the medical facility as well. So there's a lot that I think still begs for other answers. Mr. Singer, I would like to compliment you. In my estimation, the idea of completely listing all the variants and special permit requests all on one document was most helpful and facilitated the looking through the zoning bylaws to see what was applicable and what wasn't. That has saved a lot of time and effort. So on that, I wish to compliment you.
Okay, I just have a couple of things that I'd like to say, and then we're going to invite people in the audience to speak.
Peer review first, isn't it?
Pardon me?
Cape Cod Commission coming first?
Yeah, no, well, I'm going to just speak to a couple of things, if I may. Mr. Singer, you referred to the site plan review when suggesting that the Design Review Committee approved or accepted the design for this canopy. And yet, the Community Development and Planning certainly weighed in, saying that they were greatly opposed. They were in disagreement, and
Oh, the lady who handed me this book a few minutes ago certainly doesn't like the canopy.
let's not overlook that component of it. The existing Shell station is still an issue for me, but we'll come to that later. And where is the dumpster located on the plans? Because I can't find it.
And Al McCallie, engineering, proposing the trash enclosure back.
Well, I see that location. Is that marked somewhere in what some of these plans we're considering
Yes.
as a dumpster location?
Yes, it says new 23 by 11-foot trash corral with concrete pad foundation.
It says that on our new sheet.
One drawing.
You don't see one or two.
That's the new sheet we were handed this evening?
That's in the new plans that you have received. But it's on the old plans as well.
Well, I can see no, I can see the location. I'm sorry, but I can't see the,
It's on the back right. It's been on the
I don't
plans
see
from
where
the
it's
beginning.
noted, though, that that's the
It's
dumpster
noted right
location.
here.
Yeah.
Val, yeah.
It's there.
I understand that's the location. I'm trying to find the sheet where
Oh.
it says that's the location.
C1,
C1.
and off to the right.
Would you like?
Right.
C1, C2.
Yeah.
My apologies for the confusion.
No, you're not the one confused, I am.
No, I mean, I'm leading to it, so here's the trash enclosure. Here's the note that calls off.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Now, I just wanted to make sure I knew where it was located, because, yeah, we've been concerned about the aesthetics of those in the past. So, let's see, we're going to hear from the Cape Cod Commission next, are we? Thank you so very much, and sir, if you would identify yourself for everybody sitting at home, we would greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Stephen Tupper. I'm the Transportation Program Manager at the Cape Cod Commission. So as Randy has gone through much of the detail of the supplemental submission on transportation, I won't go point by point, but I thought I would be able to reference primarily our comment letter on April 24th. There are a number of items that were addressed to our satisfaction in that letter, so I'd like to highlight those. And there are still some outstanding concerns. I want to make sure I highlight those as well. And I just want to start with the biggest concern was the operations of the driveway. Those largely, the concerns really carry forward even in the second submission. But I will walk through the letter on April 24th and note some of the things that were done in response to our comments. So first, the study area was expanded as was recommended. I think it's important to understand the operations of the corridor from signal to signal. So now we have the benefit of additional analysis in terms of the operations of each signal and also look at the crashes throughout the corridor. And speaking specifically to the crashes, because there were some questions about that, the crash analysis of both of the signals show that the signals were under the district average for a traffic signal. So we tend to see crashes at a signal just given that there's a lot going on. I did want to highlight the segment analysis that was submitted as well. So within the segment between the two signals, there were 60 crashes over that 5-year period. And considering the volumes and considering the type of roadway, that's actually above the state average for that segment. So that's probably not surprising for those who drive. There are some safety issues out there, but it was documented in the report. But I just wanted to make sure we highlighted those crash numbers as well. There was some discussion in our comment letter about the uses on the site and specifically how the trip generation analysis was conducted. The original submission was based on ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation manual, which is the standard for this sort of analysis. It was based on a super convenience market gas station use. Our concern at the time was that that use didn't accurately capture the proposed co-branding use specifically with the drive-in. The ITE manual isn't clear in whether or not it considers a coffee drive-in part of that use, and we were concerned that there may be additional trips generated from that use. So the additional submission did provide some additional discussion of that, specifically the observations in Lakeville. I would have ideally liked to see in a couple more locations as point of reference. That being said, I don't expect it would change the bottom line too much, so I wouldn't put too fine a point on that. I expect the operational results would be similar, so I'd really still focus on some of the operations. And that's what I really want to come to next, is some of the operational issues. Because in my opinion, that is the biggest thing this board should really be focusing on, is the operations at the driveway. It is certainly true that these analyses tend to be conservative, but they're conservative for an important reason, is that we don't want to induce a hazard. So certainly this is a challenging corridor, and some of the faults are in the existing roadway, but the site is choosing to locate on this roadway and choosing to locate across from a Stop and Shop driveway that does have its challenges. Level of service F is something that we do commonly see on these corridors, so I would want to note that, but I also want to note that a number of the movements are over capacity. So there's level of service F, and then there's over capacity, which really means that the intersection doesn't have the ability to process all the traffic moving in and out of it. So when we see that, we really are concerned. So when we want to make sure that there's a careful look at what's being done on the site to mitigate that, and a careful look to make sure that you're really not worsening a situation out there that already presents challenges. So certainly I would encourage continued focus on the operations there and making sure that that is paid careful attention to throughout the process. And I'm certainly happy to go into any more detail on these points, but there's just a couple more I wanted to cover in high order. The applicant did propose an additional traffic demand management strategy, so that's certainly good to see. Anything that can bring down the vehicle trips to the site is certainly good, a good approach. The submission does highlight the benefit of being near the Cape Cod Rail Trail. That certainly is an asset, presents an opportunity for folks to come to the site on a bike or as a pedestrian. Certainly we can get you more details on the number, but when we do counts on the bike path, we commonly see over 1,000 users in a day at a given point. So certainly the potential, if there's a nearby destination, for them to want to come and frequent that business. So it is an opportunity, but it's also a challenge. So one thing we highlighted in our letter was our concern for pedestrian safety, and I think that's definitely elevated given the rail trail and given that folks will be coming off the rail trail on the opposite side of Station Ave. So there's currently no dedicated pedestrian facilities on the side of Station Ave that the project is proposed. So folks would most likely be coming across Station Ave at an uncontrolled location and then going along Station Ave where there is no sidewalk. There are goat paths there, so we've seen people out there. When I was out there observing the site, I saw bicyclists moving up and down. Certainly you'll see that more as the season starts. So in addition to the vehicle operations, I do have concerns about non-motorists safely accessing the site. And then since there was substantial discussion on traffic signals and access management, I did want to touch on that briefly. We had suggested in our original submission for these analyses to be included. We thought it was important to understand whether or not a traffic signal would be warranted at this location. As Mr. Hart indicated, a warrant does not require a signal. It just says one potentially could be put in. There are certainly challenges with putting a signal in on a location like this with two nearby signals. So if that were to be considered, additional analysis would be needed. You'd want to see whether it improves operations throughout the corridor, and you'd want to see whether or not it can be accommodated within the site. So certainly it's something that should be considered if you're looking to develop a location with this sort of congestion issue. But there are additional analyses that would need to be conducted. And certainly if this such an improvement were to be considered, you'd want to look at this situation holistically. So maybe the current location of the Stop and Shop driveway and the proposed location of this development make it challenging to put a signal in. But when you're doing that sort of infrastructure and upgrade, you want to really think about it holistically. So maybe some of the driveways could be moved a little to accommodate it. Having not done the analysis, I can't say if a signal would be an appropriate solution here, but it's certainly something that is worth considering given some of the operational analyses that we see there. And similarly, access management. We heard a number of good suggestions that the board presented here. In general, limiting some of the conflicting movements can be helpful, but without a really more detailed analysis, it would be tough to recommend which of those would be most appropriate. Just to give you an example, if you were to restrict the northerly site drive to enter only and the southerly site drive to exit only, that would certainly eliminate some of the conflicts that you see. Then you actually have more vehicles queuing to take a left out of that southerly driveway. So all of the potential discussions here have merit and are worth considering, but without more detailed analysis, it's really not possible to tell which is the optimal solution. So there certainly could be some additional work to be done if you wanted to dig a little deeper on that front. So with that, I will conclude that largely the additional traffic study highlighted the points that we were concerned about, but some of those operational and site access for non-motorist concerns still exist, in our opinion, based on the proposal in front of you.
Thank you. Would you mind remaining at the mic for a few moments, because I'm sure people have questions for you?
As long as you like, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Barron, any questions?
I'm encouraged, Steve, to hear you say that the possibility that more study might be needed.
Mr. Nicanello?
Yeah, I'd just like to say the best traffic in my mind is moving traffic. And when you throw up another obstacle in a stoplight, I understand it's warranted, all this stuff, but it doesn't do anything for you want to go anywhere. So if you keep moving, to me, that's good traffic. I don't mind being in that type of traffic. I think we had a discussion last time about I think Mr. Neitz raised it up too, about the pedestrians and the bikes, because there is no way to get to that facility when you're on the west side of Station Avenue. So you have to come across the road, and that to me is not inviting.
I'll come over the bridge and then come down.
There's no access.
You can't, you can't, you're all fenced in.
Too high.
We wanted access, Mr. Chairman, but the state, I might have mentioned this last time, the state did not release the railroad easement up to there, and it actually separates us, so we did design for it, but we legally can't do it.
I apologize. I think you told us that last time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Now, to Mr. Nicanello's point with the cloverleaf, if you have any pull and you want to get the railroad to release it so we can have it, we're all for that.
Yes, I think everybody would like that.
Moving along, is there anything else?
Go right ahead, sir.
All right, and Mr. Igo?
Nothing, thank you.
And Mr. Martin?
Nothing new. I would concur with Mr. Barron's comments.
And Mr. Neitz?
All set, thank you.
Okay, so I want to go to the 4 bullet points on page 4 of your letter of 4/24/19, just so that we know if we're writing decisions and considering things, what needs to be included and what does not. Trip reduction measures, we've heard a suggestion that the employees will somehow ride bikes or have carpooling in. Is there anything beyond that we've heard about that you would suggest for trip reduction at the site, save for having an in-only and an out-only exit?
I'd say in general, the trip reduction strategy proposed by the applicant is fair for the proposed use. I'd say the only deficiency there, again, is that bicycle and pedestrian access really is not well accommodated on the site, so I wouldn't expect a good reduction because people are not going to be encouraged to walk to the site the way it's currently laid out.
All right, just give me a minute to keep pace with you, okay?
Yes, sir.
Their employee program of encouraging carpooling and/or bicycle riding would help alleviate or ameliorate that concern. Is that right?
With the provision of safe facilities for cyclists and pedestrians, yes.
All right, going to the next bullet point. Healthy transportation. So we're talking about the installation of sidewalks along a portion of Station Ave, at least in front of this petitioner's property. Are there remind me, are there existing sidewalks that would connect to this property if we ran a sidewalk just down in front of
Not on
the
this side of the street.
It doesn't do anything.
Okay. So, I mean, I agree with you. It'd be lovely to see sidewalks all down Station Ave, particularly that would, maybe even a bike lane at some point, but I'm not seeing that in the future anytime soon. So is there anything beyond that you would suggest to deal with healthy transportation?
So when we've had situations like this in the past, while we always would prefer physical infrastructure being built, we have had applicants being willing to give an easement should a sidewalk be built, so that then it would give the town a little more room to work with that could meander off the roadway.
So a prospective construction of a sidewalk. See, that's why we love your commission, because you come up with such creative ideas.
I appreciate that.
Future sidewalk. Well, I don't know that that's possible in this application, the way that's been drafted, but we'll see. Access management is the next. Techniques to limit the number of conflict points, and that's the elephant in the room, so to speak. And at least at this point, it would be the commission's general view that more study would need to be known to determine the optimum method for location of the two curb cuts and whether or not a traffic light at that location would be a benefit of Maine. Am I right on that?
Well stated. And I will make one clarification. I don't expect that there will be a single optimal solution. It'll really be a balancing between different trade-offs.
Well, of course, it won't be optimum, because optimum, as we've just heard, would be no traffic, additional traffic. But in truth, it's something that would be right for this location is not yet before us because we don't know that.
Correct.
Businesses need traffic.
And on your last point, I'm sorry to delay you. On your last point, site circulation, again, that kind of goes hand in hand with what we were just talking about. Is that fair to say?
It does. I'd say the one additional thing to highlight here is the queuing for the drive-through is certainly a concern at this site, given that if queues extended beyond what is predicted, you'd really be gumming up the site and spilling over onto Station Ave. So that really goes to what is that co-branded use. So we saw queue analysis based on a Mary Lou's coffee. If it were a different co-branded use, you may expect different queuing characteristics. I know some Dunkin' Donuts have extended queues beyond what you typically see at a Mary Lou's. So being careful about what that co-branded use, to the extent that there's discussion of that, certainly the queuing is something to keep an eye on.
Well, the site has to have so many parking spots, and what's being proposed seems to me to be a very good solution on how to deal with that 10th car issue, which is that those 3 spots are not open to the public anyway, but accommodate employees. So even if there were 10 cars there, nobody would seem to be impacted by it. So do you see that as a viable solution to your concerns about internal circulation due to the drive-through?
Should there be only 10 vehicles queued? Yes. And as I understand your regulations, that's what's required, so.
Require 10. And unfortunately, everybody on this board can tell you that the Route 28 Dunkin' Donuts location that has a stacking lane, sometimes people will actually wait and park on Route 28. A 2-lane road that should be 4 lanes whenever you're considering improving transportation on Cape Cod.
We'll take that into consideration, certainly in long-term planning.
Okay. So the big issue on site circulation would be the stacking lane problem, and that at least a remedy has been offered that appears to be a reasonable remedy. Would you agree?
I would agree. I guess the one concern I would have is if in any situation there's spillback onto Station Ave, that's problematic. So what we have seen in other developments is if a development like this could go in, there could be an after study just to keep an eye on those sort of conditions going forward. If there is an issue, there would have to be a remedy. You really wouldn't want to impact Station Ave.
So that makes a lot of sense. I can't imagine anybody waiting in line on Station Ave and not having a lot of horns beeping at them. But thank you very much. Did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Nope, I covered the points that I wanted to share with this group today. I'd be happy to stay if any additional questions arise, but thank you.
That'd be very nice, thank you. All right. So a lot of suggestions came out when I went to ask another follow-up question myself. Wait a minute, we got to hear from the Cape Cod Commission. Oh, of course, we're going to hear from everybody that wants to speak tonight. So is there anybody that would care to speak that has not spoken or had the information that they wish to present to us already provided and speak in favor of this petition? If so, please come to our microphone. And seeing none, does anybody care to speak in opposition to this petition? And if so, please come to the microphone. And I'm seeing, so because I know the gentleman walking up to be an esteemed fellow and colleague of mine, Mr. Jamie Vieira. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. James Vieira, I'm here in my capacity as Vice President of the Davenport Company. So you have in your packet 2 letters signed by Mr. DeWitt Davenport, trustee of Davenport Realty, owner of property that is a party in interest, receiving butter notification for the application. One simple point that I want to raise, Mr. DeYoung, you noted that access management on the commission's letter was the elephant in the room, and I would suggest that we have the unique situation of we have 2 elephants in this room. And the first elephant in the room is the variance criteria that the board is required to meet. There are multiple requests for variances, and as the board is aware, besides being sparingly granted, the standard requires meeting a shape, soil condition, or topographical feature that presents a hardship. And I would submit to you that neither this evening nor at the May 9th submission did the applicant adequately or candidly remotely address that standard. There is no soil condition. They conceded that it is sand. There's nothing unique about sand. This is the peninsula of sand. There is no topographical features. They provided topographical analysis. There's nothing unique about that topographical feature. It's relatively flat. And nor is there a shape factor. It's a rectangle. So until they can cross that threshold, which I submit to you that they can't, then really the weight of the application collapses. And they have several, and Mr. Singer points out one where he talked about, in the case that he gave you, the risk of hazard or damage to meeting a hardship requirement. And he cited a case. In that case, before you get to the question of hardship, it was noted in it that in building that marina in Salem, where they wanted to put a travel lift adjacent to the water, this was the boundary line, the court found that there was a shape factor in that property. So before you can get to hardship in terms of the harm or damage, you got to have some factor and they don't meet it. Now, if you want to sidestep that and get to the question of risk of harm or damage, what's the risk of harm or damage to meeting the front setback? They need 75 feet. They have 43. What's the risk of harm of compliance? I would submit 0. Similarly, what's the risk of harm of the use in the APD that they're abating? Prohibited is prohibited. You're not abating a risk by allowing it. So I would suggest that there are a myriad of problems, and ironically, someone with some experience of putting in similar type operations for a competitor, when you're dealing with mitigation and mitigation and mitigation, you got a problem. You can have some small types of mitigation. To Mr. Martin's point, you can change the canopy because that's aesthetics. And you can change around the bottom of the canopy because that's aesthetics. But if you've got queuing up problems, and let's face it, there's gonna be more than 10 cars there. We all know that. Go to the Dunkin' Donuts and Dennis behind the movie theater. They wrap around the back of the movie theater on Saturday mornings. If there's 30 cars there, they're queuing up. There's 5. So there are a lot of problems. No disrespect meant to the applicant here whatsoever. The problem is simply the site is inappropriate for all of the things that they want to do on the site. And that's not just because of the traffic. It goes right to the point that I started with. How do they overcome the need to meet the requirements of shape, soil condition, or topography? And if none of them exists, then we can't move any further. And based on that alone, the application should be denied. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else care to speak in opposition to this petition? If so, would you come to the microphone? Okay, so at this point, I guess we close it to public input on the petition, and I'm just going to kind of poll the board at this point. Do you feel that you have enough information to even proceed with contemplation of any of the relief that's been offered tonight? Any of the relief that's being sought, rather, tonight, I apologize. Let's start with you, Mr.
I
Nates.
was just wondering if we gave an opportunity for any proponents who were here.
We did.
I think somebody mentioned that the...
I did, didn't I? I said, did anybody wish to speak in support
In
of the
favor.
petition? If I
Okay.
did not, please let me invite you up now.
No, you did.
I thought the proposed owner of
Opposed one?
the proposed owner of the site was going to, had his attorney here. I thought he was going to make a presentation to me.
You mean the...
Mr. Chamberlain, thought he was going to make
Oh,
a...
Mr. Chamberlain, did you care to speak tonight? I mean, I can only invite, I can't force, and I don't want to pry you from your seat, but
I
you...
intentionally sat on my hands, Mr. Chairman, so I appreciate the consideration, Mr. Dietz, but we're riding with the comments of the applicant.
All right, well, you know, we always find you to be a very eloquent speaker, and I think that's why Mr. Neitz wanted to hear from you. 'Cause
He's hiding behind the podium, so I can't see him. but-
He's tired of hearing me talk tonight, Mr. Chamberlain. I do know that our building commissioner is here, and frankly, I'd like to hear from him a moment, if he's, well, not seeing him.
He's there.
There he is.
Right next to our town planner.
Would you, and I'm also, we've asked for proponents and opponents, but personally for me, I'd like to hear from both the building commissioner and the town planner. So why don't we start with you, Mark? Just identify yourself for the people at home, if you would, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members of the board, and Miss Sandy. I'm Mark Grills, Town of Yarmouth Building Commissioner. I'm not either a proponent nor opponent. I'm here to
Not asking you that,
answer
Matt.
any questions.
Sure.
One of them would be the mixed-use question or the co-branding question.
Sure.
When I review applications, I look at all of the uses that are on the parcel, I look at the required parking for each of the uses, and then we make sure that everything fits in place. So they didn't need any additional parking. And then the most restrictive use is the one that's actually seeking relief from you now.
Okay. So in your opinion, relative to the number of businesses that will be located at this position, at this location, a determination was made that there was suitable parking for all 3 businesses,
Correct.
not just the one gas station.
Correct.
All right. And that truly was one of my biggest concerns. When we start putting 4 and 5 businesses in, if we put a bank teller in there, we'd now need to consider a bank, wouldn't we?
Absolutely.
Additional parking?
Correct.
Is there anything else about this petition that causes you to be concerned for zoning relief that may be needed that we have not already addressed?
No, I think you've pretty much covered it all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you for delaying your long trip home.
No worries.
And now we're blessed to have our town planner here, and would you identify yourselves for
Yes,
our
I'm
record?
Kathy Williams, Yarmouth Town Planner.
Always good to see you, Ms. Williams.
Thank you. I think a lot to do with the mixed uses as far as having a lot of different commercial uses on one property. A lot of it has to do with also needing to meet all of the dimensional requirements. That's kind of what keeps a development on a site reasonable compared to things like having the buffers and the setbacks. And they're asking for a lot of variances with regard to those dimensional standards. I think meeting the criteria for variances is going to be a little bit difficult on this site for many of the reasons that Mr. Vieira mentioned. I also think it is somewhat of a heavy use on a very congested road, something that's not quite as intense. There's a lot of intense development being proposed on this site, might be an issue. But I do think even with regard to simply the special permit criteria for the service station, it gets right back to nuisance and congestion. Unfortunately, the last person in, which might be, this is kind of like the last open space on this roadway. Unfortunately, the last person in has to deal with all of the congestion and all of the issues from all the other businesses that have come before it. I'm really glad that Mr. Neitz mentioned the Cape Cod Rail Trail. We really haven't seen a lot of traffic to that parking lot there. I think there's like 90 spaces there because it really is just becoming the trailhead, and we recently connected to the main pathway all the way up to Wellfleet. I think you're going to see a lot more traffic of people going there as a destination. They may also stop at different businesses, but you're going to see more traffic related to that.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions of Ms. Williams before she leaves? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, just a couple brief responses.
Sure.
And not to get into them in depth tonight, but the 2 of the issues that would like an opportunity to readdress with the board. I would respectfully disagree with Mr. Vieira's analysis that there are no shape, topography, or
But we're going to
soil
get to that in a
conditions
minute, I
issues. Right,
think.
but so there is a topography issue with the area, and also I would like to come back to, maybe not right now or tonight, but the 3 businesses versus 2, I think needs some more redress as well. Just wanted to put that on the record.
You think it does need more redress?
Well, I disagree with, the parking's all met, and as Mr. Grills said, I don't think any additional zoning is needed, but to the extent that the board has concerns about it, the way these businesses are licensed, the convenience store and service station are one use. The co-brand maybe would be a second use, but then you're at 2, to your earlier comments, as opposed to
I'm
3.
satisfied if Mark tells us he did the parking calculation, and the parking calculation was based upon 3 businesses.
Then I'm satisfied too.
Personally, I'm just saying I'm personally satisfied. I'm only speaking of one of many.
Well,
but-
I'm only personally satisfied with you
but-
right now
but
on
I
that
am-
issue, depending what everyone else says.
I am kind of concerned about where in Furlong you suggest. Can you cite to me specifically where in Furlong? Unfortunately, this doesn't have head notes, so it's kind of hard.
Yeah, it was a thought. On the copy I gave you, what I read from was the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3. Sorry, I can't, it's the way it's written, I can't give you a better description of that.
That's the argument of the appellant, right?
I know, those are the
Question whether a safety concern-
judges.
I'm
the-
sorry.
The bottom of page, of the bottom of the second page and the top of the third page are the court's finding. I do have a copy, I didn't submit it to you, but again, there is the lower court's case was much more in-depth, it was like a 10, 12-page decision. But the language I read was the appellate court's findings in the case, and that's what I was referring to you to just now.
Well, okay. Does the board care to have any discussion before we start?
I just had another question I thought about it for the petitioner, if that's okay. I know we talked briefly before about the, I guess, buying land from the town for the recharge calculations. Has been any further progress on that, or what's the status? Does land have to be procured from either the town or another source to meet those calculations, and is this unfeasible project without that?
Well, 2 answers to the second part is yes, it would be unfeasible without it. And so to answer your first question, yes, that process is underway. So what is in order to, for septic purposes, you need some additional off-site land, which were proposed in the nitrogen aggregation plan. The town has I met with Karen Green a couple days ago. They just about finished appointing the committee under the new land disposition policy, and then they will be holding meetings. We have filed applications for consideration of a couple parcels of land. So that is in play, and what we would be expecting you to do as a board, if you ultimately vote to approve it, is adding that as a condition, because it's something that needs to be done.
Mr. Chairman, as a point of interest, this was just received by me today, just a couple hours before this board convened. The Land Disposition Committee just received its instructions that today that it would be meeting as a result of a staff committee which will meet in next few weeks to conduct an initial review of this site. In other words, Mr. Singer is correct. The mechanism is underway, but it has not reached fruition at all.
Correct.
And I'm more than glad to share a copy of that with you, Mr. Singer. And I only have limited copies to share with the board. But I am a member of that Land Disposition Committee, and it has not gone forward at this point. So the determination of the request is still pending.
That is correct. Mr. Chairman, could Mr. Delicapini address the board?
Pardon me?
Could Mr. Delicapini, the president of the applicant, address the board?
Of course, but here I want you to get a,
Oh, I have a copy.
Got a copy.
I do have a copy. Thank you. Mr. Barron gave us one.
Make it a condition of approval.
I'll be brief. I know it's getting late.
take all the
and I-
time you want.
And I do appreciate everybody's time and effort. I just want to say, we're good stewards for the towns and cities that we're in Rhode Island. We have a lot of properties that are smaller than this. I know we've mentioned intersection and signal lights before. If we have the ability to be at a signal light, we would love to, but even the property that we have now at the Shell station is not at a signal light, so the challenges are already there. I've heard a lot of people making concerns about the potential other coffee shop that's in the town, and I just would like and hope that people, the board would look at this as a cumulative of application and what it will affect in the surrounding properties. Not only will it affect this property, it'll also affect the Shell station, the other gas station, and potentially the other coffee shops, and potentially eliminate some of the traffic that's being caused at some of those other properties by putting it onto this facility here. I think we really had to jump through a lot of hoops. We heard what you guys asked for at the last council, and being able to eliminate the service repairs at these facilities, it was not an easy, process to be able to just give that up, especially on properties that we don't control. But we heard you, and you made a valid point. If we can do this, we really would consider it as something as a win, and that's why we went back and we fought for it and we got it. Eliminating all the tanks, consolidating everything here, I really think the project will be good for Yarmouth, South Yarmouth, and I think it'll be good for even our property. I mean, I looked at it, and I'm the big advocate that said, let's put more landscape, let's widen it to 20 feet, let's open up the area, because I heard you loud and clear, you didn't want to see a parking lot of cars going across. So we tried to accommodate as much as I can, to Mr. Martin's concerns, the canopy and everything else. Because of the greenery and everything that we're leaving in the front, it's just, for us not to have at least some sort of representation, as you're seeing through the trees that are remaining and everything else. So we said, let's put the columns on the bottom. We tried to accommodate as much as possible. The traffic is already there. I'm feeling, and the planner really, nailed it. I feel like we're late to the game, and unfortunately, we're the ones being forced into the situation. I would never build a facility that I feel is going to jeopardize my customers, my employees, myself. It's going to be my people that are going to be working there. And you know what? The last thing I would ever, the worst day of my life was when one of my employees was killed, and he was shot to death. And it's not anything anybody wants to go through. But I would just hope that the board would really listen to what we've asked and just try to accommodate as much as possible.
Well, we thank you for that, and I want to just say something before anybody, that I thank you for your sincerity, but I also want to tell you something. The town needs to live with this project long before you may still be in charge of the company. Long rather after you may still be in charge of the company. And we're either going to get it right or we're not going to do it.
I agree.
And not only that, we have a mandate by law, and that law is the law applicable to the grant of variances and special permits. And we don't, even though it might feel good to us, and even though it might look good to us, we don't have a right to deviate from that law. Because if we do, then somebody that is, impacted by our decision appeals it and is successful on appeal if we do not apply the right law to the application of the facts in this case, in the granting of variances, and a very specially different thing, special permits. So there's nobody on this board that didn't appreciate all the comments in the presentation you did the first time, and your sincerity and desire to work with us this time.
Thank you.
But, having said that, we need to protect the town, and that's what our role is.
Completely understand.
So, please, don't think we're picking on anybody.
Oh, no, by no means.
And I know you want to get going on the project as of yesterday, but frankly, I'm only speaking for myself when I tell you I don't think I'm quite there in my understanding of how we have met the burdens of the town in the application of zoning requirements for variances, I'm sorry, statutory requirements for the grant of variances and special permits. Now I'll shut up, Mr. Hyden.
Well, you don't shut up. You sounded very good. A couple of questions. First one, obviously, this curb cut is a big issue. Could you live with a left-right only on the southerly driveway? And if we had right in, right out on the northerly, could you still get your trucks in there and refuel?
We ran a lot of different scenarios, and, I guess I'm sitting back, and I've heard some comments even to the point of, if they weren't lined up directly across from the Stop and Shop, maybe it wouldn't create. We originally came in with the plan when the driveways weren't lined up across from Stop and Shop, and we were told to line them up for Stop and Shop. So I'm like, I just want to know what direction really would the city really wants me to go, or the town really wants me to go. The challenge that we have, and I had offered up to Andrew, was maybe what we could do is, if we have full access, just put a requirement that in 12 months during a peak season that it's reevaluated, and if it does come up to the point where, okay, we see that it's not operating properly or it's creating a hazard, then we restrict those driveways as you're mentioning.
But, well, what if we did restrict them? Is it something that you could live with?
I've got to go back, I've got to look at how everything turns and how the radiuses are and everything else, but normally on these projects, if we don't have free access on two driveways, it becomes very difficult to be able to get all the cars in, and to even the Cape Cod Commission's comments, I believe, now you're bottlenecking all the cars into one driveway, and it really just creates a lot of
on
problems.
the exit, you would.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, we're just trying to,
Yeah.
we're kind of brainstorming here.
Sure.
As far as that canopy's concerned, I mean, you could eliminate that yellow and the red and just leave that shell emblem, couldn't you?
Oh, the challenge is, I mean, anything that I'm putting on that canopy is a oil shell specific spec. Now, I know some places in Yarmouth have something changes, but they were another station before, and then they became a shell. But for me, building the shell brand new and wanting to be able to get the brand, being able to put the franchise up over there, it's really a requirement that they really hold us true. The family of signs, the canopy itself, the dispensers, the way they look and so forth. Shell really they have one book that basically says, this is what we want them to look for. So I mean, my preference would be to keep it as much as possible. So.
And did I hear you correct that you said that you were going to decommission that Shell station of all service and everything?
Yes.
So there would be no
Both
automobile repairs, there would be no sale of fuel?
48 months.
Right.
Within 48 months?
Within 48 months, we figured give it time to be able to phase everything out, because it's not only just that Shell station, but it's also the other gas station across the
Both
street.
stations, right?
Yes, it's both locations that we would eliminate all the hazard conditions that are going on right now.
That's huge. Yeah, it's good.
That includes a restriction that there would be no auto servicing of any type of those?
Yeah, I would think that any type of auto servicing would require some sort of hazard. I mean, I guess they could put windshield wipers on or something like that, which doesn't really have any type of hazard materials and wouldn't be a detriment to the aquifer area. But overall, I think if I flash forward and I think what would this look like if the city granted us, the town granted us the permission to be able to do this, 3 years down the line, driving down that road, I see, a cleaned up corner at that set of lights. I drive down and I see the Shell station with all the greenery and vegetation, and completely debranded of any Shell identification, so no yellow or red or anything on that, maybe a white building or whatever, and then you drive further down, and after you go over underneath the overpass, there's a nice facility sitting in the back with the greenery across the front, and I think it would really improve what is on Station Ave right now.
Okay, so is there anything else, or did anybody have any questions? Please. Sure.
Yes, thank you. To me, it seems like the main driver in the relocation is you want to get closer to Exit 8.
The challenge that we just don't have enough land where we are right now, and this is a much larger piece of the property, so it gives us the ability. It really just comes down to economics and being able to justify, invest in the capital, rebuild the facility, and what we really need. So that's the challenge. I mean, I would have loved it if we could have just stayed on our own property. We already have the licenses and everything else, but the challenge is what people want today isn't what is there today. What they want is a new facility, a one-stop shop where they can go in, they can get their fuel, get something to drink, potentially go to a co-brander, get a cup of coffee, and then leave. So that's really what people are looking for today. So, and that is really the only facility. If it was at a corner or a signal light, we would have been after that trying to get that. But unfortunately, to the point it's been brought up a few times, this is really the last piece on that road that can be developed to that point.
So you don't feel that where your service stations now are losing opportunity because the other competitor is closer to the exit?
I think the other competitor is there no matter what. So it's one of those situations that, we're in a lot of situations where there's multiple gas stations, and I really don't look at the competitors as something that really challenges me. I think the mobile station right there now is probably the best location of the three that are in that facility. It's the newest one. But you know what, I'm not concerned with, what I'm looking to do is build something that really people want today. And if you've seen what's been built, even the other attorney that came up that represented other people in this industry, what they're building today is not what we have on that street. It seems like that's almost transitioned, and now what people want is something, so to degree is, and really the pass-by traffic, I don't really foresee pulling people off of 6. I can only wish that my brand and my identity would be that powerful that I would be bringing people there as a destination. It's really something that if you're on the road, hey, let me grab a gallon of milk because I'm on my way home, let me grab a coffee because I'm on my way out. I'm not going to be pulling people off of the highway or creating really that much more traffic in that area, because really the services are already there.
Well,
There's already a coffee shop, there's already gas stations.
If you look around the Commonwealth, I mean, the prime location for a fuel station is where the mobile station is.
Oh, sure.
Typically.
Sure.
So I understand that it's very valuable to you, that piece of property, which I feel, Mr. Chairman, is very undersized for the amount of businesses that are going to be there. Thank you.
And to add to your point, is normally we like to be the first one off of a highway, because usually that is where people, if they need fuel, stop the first point. We're after that mobile station, so to some degree, they're going to take a majority of the people that are coming off that really are in need, and then we'll take the people that know us, like us, have a great experience when they come in, and so forth. So I mean, I think it's an area where I think we could really do a nice job for everyone.
One of your locations is Route 134 in Dennis? One of your locations
Yes.
is Route 134 in Dennis?
Yes.
And I recognize that you can't make a right turn out of that parking lot onto a 134. I mean, a left turn, rather.
It's a divided highway.
But when that station was remodeled, was all the traffic directed to flow around to the, even the right turning traffic? Was all of that directed on into the parking lot controlled by the traffic light?
I don't think we changed any of the curb cuts.
Those curb cuts are the same.
Yeah, they're right.
On 134,
The
they
ones on
remain the
134
same?
were not changed at all. Those are the same.
There's no drive-in there, though.
Pardon me?
There's no drive-up service.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's a car wash on
And
that site, but no drive.
that's one of the reasons we couldn't really use it as a gauge to say, okay, well, when we're comparing trip counts and everything else, there was no drive-through at that location, so they went to obviously the closest one that we felt that.
So it has less traffic, but again, it's directed.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, just to follow what Mr. Delacapini said in response, what we're asking the board to look at is to look at this holistically, because as we submitted in our summary originally, we are asking for variance, and it's easy for you guys to say, no, you don't meet those requirements. But when you look at it holistically, and you look at all of the properties that are involved, and you look at all of the benefits and the pieces, a lot of moving pieces. I do believe, and we do believe, that we do meet the variance criteria, which we can discuss at a later time, but I think looking at this holistically, if you just look at this one piece of property, on this Google map image, obviously, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We're having the conversation because of all the moving pieces and all those pieces that lead to a good result, and which we believe are justifiable under the law.
Do you think you could write a memorandum that could support that?
Apparently, I am going to.
Well, that might be
Yeah,
helpful.
I think that we need a break. First of all, is the board prepared to vote on this application this evening?
I don't know. I don't know that.
Yes.
I'll tell you, I'm not, and the reason I'm not is because, one, I agree with the site plan review, forgetting the design review committee for a moment. I'm sorry, Mr. Martin. I agree with the community development and planning that roof structure. Let me just.
I wasn't at the meeting that day.
Pardon me?
I wasn't at the meeting that day.
That's all right. But I know that you love the members and dearly wish to support them in every aspect. I do want to say to you, look, I think it's a great idea. I think the accommodations you've tried to make to us have been wonderful. I would love to see a practical way of this happening where it does not adversely impact the traffic, which is my primary concern. So my concern is the canopy, the determination of, as I think the wonderful gentleman from the Cape Cod Commission put it, the optimum traffic flow. And I don't see that information in front of us in any guise or manner. It's no disrespect to your traffic study, please understand that. But I don't think we've talked about the options that may be available to reduce the traffic hazard which may result from this project. And I think more importantly, I'd really love to see something that weighs in on each variance request where the variance criteria is met. Because I don't think, as I have quickly read the Furlong case, I'm not seeing that as either on point or determinative of anything we're talking about here tonight. That's my feeling.
And could I just follow up with what he just said, and that is, I see that you've requested a number of variances. And I'm looking at a variance, for instance, that you just want a taller sign to show the price of gasoline. So do you really need all those variances? Can you streamline that? Can you eliminate some of these variances?
Well, importantly, can you justify any of them?
Well, of course, I mean, if you can justify each and every one of them, then, and if the law supports it, then by all means go ahead. But I'm just suggesting that if it's a little difficult for you to get there, and you really don't need it, you know, maybe you want to eliminate that or modify it. But I personally, my biggest concern is the traffic. And if there was a way to, and we can argue about the variance criteria, and if you're going to write a memorandum to support your position, then we can look at that and we can have that legal discussion. I think Attorney Vieira made some very, very good points. And I do think that you have some hurdles to get over to meet that criteria. And variances are very difficult to get. I will say that this area right here, my recollection is we've granted a number of variances around this particular location to businesses across the street, adjacent to it, on the other side of the new railroad track there. So it's not like we haven't granted variances in this area. And I would point out that, you know, our goal here is to diminish the fuel capacity in the APD. And I think that's a real benefit to the town. And when I hear that the petitioner is essentially going to totally decommission his Shell station to the extent that we're not going to have anything going on there.
Well, anything of an automotive.
Anything of an automotive use, I think that site in and of itself is going to transcend itself into something that's going to be certainly a betterment to the town as well. So I'm not prepared to vote on this tonight. I'm certainly willing to give the petitioner the benefit of putting together a memorandum and to rebut what Attorney Vieira has proposed to the board. So I would suggest that we continue this again and...
And what?
And what?
Yeah, and what? What are we asking?
Well, I would like to see a memorandum in support of the variance relief. And I would also like to have them go back and look at this driveway situation, because I just proposed something we thought of tonight when that was the left and right coming out of the southerly, which would not interfere with the Stop and Shop parking lot at all. Now, I know you can't, you gotta get your trucks in and out of there. If you can't get a fuel truck in and out of there, then you got a problem, obviously. But you might be able to, there's a raised curb, all right, that a truck might be able to drive over, that a car wouldn't necessarily do that. So you might be able to come in and get out yourself. I mean, if we could say, we're gonna restrict it to just the 10-wheeler coming in and out of there, or the 18-wheeler, excuse me. But limit all of the in and out traffic down here. I'd certainly be willing, if we did agree to that, and you wanted to have a 12-month review to see how it did, to perhaps make an adjustment of whether that other one could be opened or modified at all. I think we would probably accommodate you on that, because we've had reviews on a lot of petitions after 12 months, or 12, 24, whatever. So I'm certainly willing, I'm open to continue to listen to this and see if we can find a solution. I do think it would be a good business to have there. I've seen that business over there on 134. It's beautiful, it's modern. It would look very nice there. There's no question about it. And again, to get rid of the old tanks, to make sure there's going to be no additional pollution to the APD, to have a net reduction in all of those hazardous products, I think it's something that we should definitely look at. So those are just my thoughts.
Well, but, I mean, before I ask anybody else, how does that help us to give us different scenarios if we don't know the impact?
Right.
You know, I mean, I think that's the point so eloquently made by the Cape Cod Commission, and that is, how do we know? I mean, it's nice to talk about, but we don't know anything about traffic and its flow.
Well, can you tell us what you guys do? Well, we've heard traffic studies. Why don't you guys come back and tell us what the volume is in and out of your business? Because that's what's really going to affect it, okay? It's not how many, you know, this traffic flow and all this stuff. You tell us the numbers you're doing. Do you have 200 cars a day on average? Do you have 150? What time of day do they come in and out? How would that impact the traffic versus across the street at Stop and Shop? Are you operating at different times of day? So maybe they offset one another. Maybe the impact, maybe we're not looking at the right numbers here.
Well,
Mr.
I'm
Chairman,
sorry, Mr. Martin, do you?
Yeah, I'd just like to state, first of all, I appreciate the good things being done here in terms of the closing of the other two stations and removal of the service uses, and you know, I'm comfortable with a number of things relevant to the site and the building itself and its architecture, lighting, and so forth that we've talked about. I do feel, and I see this over and over again, that it's just kind of a large use for a site that's probably not big enough for it. The parking requirement is only 14, we're providing 28. I see no reason why we can't give up a few more spaces and need a few less variances relevant to, again, buffers, setbacks, in-lot trees, et cetera, and so forth, which we're still looking for relief for. I'd be much more comfortable, and then again, we got the whole trying to meet the variance criteria, which I think is a big step, and that's going to be up to Mr. Singer, maybe in terms of how he can sway us with that one way or another. But this is an awful lot of variances being looked for. I think probably 2/3 to 3/4. I know a lot of them you can't really do much about. You know, you got to get the canopy where it is. It'll be too close to the road and all that. But there's a lot of little variances being looked for, which I don't think, you know, I think those are give and take that you could certainly do. Why should you get a sign twice as large as all the other signs on the street? I can't see that meets the variance criteria, and no matter how I look at it. And plus all the other signs, and you know, multiple signs of all sorts, and I think there needs to be more give and take. You know, maybe get rid of the yellow on the canopy and bring the signs down to the normal size. Make the buffers what they should be. You know, at least look for fewer variances and make it come as close to conformity as possible. And I know you got a small lot, and you're trying to put a lot on it, but there are a number of things here that can be done. Maybe you don't need as many parking spaces. You know, most of the people coming to this place are going to be at the gas pumps, or they're going to be in line up for Mary Lou's Coffee. There aren't going to be as many people using those parking spaces to go in and buy candy. So I think that those parking spaces could be looked at a little bit differently, and things could be laid out a little differently, so this could work a lot better in terms of your needing less variances and the building and property looking much better. So my suggestion would be, again, I think it's a good use in many respects, but I do think it's, as presently planned, it's a little too much for the site and the amount of variances. First of all, the criteria has to be proven to me, and the fewer the variances, the better. And I think a lot of those you can get rid of. It's just a question yeah, we can do this in Natick, so I want to do it here. Well, that doesn't work so well with us. So.
Mr. Neitz, I know you want to weigh in.
Well, I'm not sure. I do have some concern about the unknown aspect of the bike path, but I think that the weight of the future aspect on both on Station Avenue and the Aquifer Protection District is significant. And I hate to see a lost opportunity to help improve the total picture and not just that one specific site. I sat on the Water Quality Advisory Committee for 8.5 years with Ralph Cipolla years ago. And it was an education and a half about water quality. And I think that any time that we can get rid of these old service stations that are no longer up to the standards of today, that are not really viable today, and when they're not viable, I'm always concerned about the potential for problems with the tanks and the management at the stations in the future. I think that's very significant, and I don't think we should shortchange that. And maybe Dick's right. Maybe there are some minor issues for variances that the petitioner could look at, but I think that the overall project and the significance of the impact on the community, I think, is something that we don't want to shortchange.
Well, following up on that, then isn't part of the whole discussion about whether or not any of the relief requiring variance, whether or not any of that relief should be granted, shouldn't that include then that discussion about the benefit to the town?
I think so.
Outweighing some of the other issues of
I think so.
All right, so Mr. Nicanello, did you want to chime in?
I'm all set, Mr. Chairman.
And how about you, Mr. Barron?
Well, I'm as a alternate today, and I don't have a final vote, whichever way the board decides. But my opinion, in short, is echoes a lot of what Mr. Martin has said, that we're trying to put too many things into the site. I think that the traffic analysis, the second traffic analysis, was helpful, but still inadequate. I think that the effort by the proponent has been very forthcoming, but I think it does not weigh enough in my mind for approval. Thank you.
So how would you like us to proceed tonight? Would you like to try to accommodate those three concerns? One, well, I don't know that I've expressed all three, but one,
took some good
a reduction in the relief, and as to that relief which requires, any relief required, explain to us why you think you meet the criteria for it. Two, I still want to know why we can't accommodate a change in that canopy, but, I mean, I'll go along with the mass and that. If everybody's happy with it, so be it. But you've heard some of the other concerns about just the way it is. And three, this issue of egress, certainly. I'm sorry, of traffic. So is that something you want us to proceed with the vote this evening, even though you know people aren't happy with that which they have to date or feel it's inadequate? Or do you want to request a continuance and provide that information?
I request a continuance so we can see if we can provide materials to
Yeah, I think it's such a project of importance. We want to be so very careful, and it's of importance because this is one of the main arteries into our town. The same way we've been so cautious about anything near Bass River Bridge or on the Hyannis end of 28. This is the central corridor into our most populated and commercially populated area of town. I think we got to be very careful on it. So if that's the case, does anyone have any long travel plans that's going to cause one of the 6 members here tonight to be away? Mr. Martin or Mr. Igo? Well, it is summertime, and so it's hot in Florida. I guess they're not traveling. All right, so let's talk about a realistic time frame, and I leave that entirely to you, Mr. Singer.
What's our next available? August 1st?
August 1st.
Would be the first meeting.
Or August 8th.
August 8th would be a meeting we'd be shooting for if that meets with you.
Yeah, we're just checking. I think so.
All right, no, take your time. I mean, we're asking you to come to a date we all can live with, because this is now from April to August, and I know everybody wants to break ground if that's going to happen.
Let's go with August 8th.
August
It's hard
8th.
to check calendars down here because there's no cell service, but mine's okay.
Well, you know, that's why a
Let's go with
paper
August 8th.
calendar sometimes
Well,
is still a
that's what I'm
wonderful
using,
thing to
yes.
have.
Let's go with August 8th.
All right, August 8th. So we need you to sign an extension agreement for that effect. And I want to say to everybody, and I think I speak for everybody on this board, we all appreciate sincerely trying to work with us to get here. But we also don't want to get here merely to have it be something that's appealed from and perhaps successfully appealed from. So keep that in mind, too.
Can I just make a comment about the canopy, because I know the petitioner said that it's tough to work with the corporate headquarters, but if you ever go through Osterville Center, you're gonna see a Dunkin' Donuts over there, and they don't have the colors that Dunkin' Donuts normally has, because Osterville wouldn't allow them to do it. So they went back to corporate, and they were able to work it out with them. I don't know if there's any way that you can work that out. I know that seems to be a problem here with the board, but you may want to check with them and see if that at least...
Well, I remember McDonald's telling us they couldn't change the new
That's right, on
McDonald's
Route 28,
remodel,
we
and
changed the
Mr.
color of
Martin made sure
McDonald's.
they changed it because
I forgot.
he was very vocal about it.
I didn't have to go all the way to Osterville. I could have gone right down Route 28.
I will ask you to consider as we move forward, not tonight, that those colors exist 100 feet from this property.
That's true.
And they will continue to exist 100 feet from this property.
Again, we're trying to improve things.
Well, we believe it is an improvement, but just so you know, it's not like we're introducing something that's not already on the corridor.
I understand.
Well,
Thank you.
That's an excellent
And
point.
also, whatever you
That's
could
an excellent
look at
point,
for-
but when you're asking for something, it's always nice to give, too.
And
So
I'd
if
like
you'd
to see
sign
more
this,
looked
we can
into
move
for
on to other
signalization as
business,
well.
and all these wonderful people who are here tonight can go home. Thank you all for your involvement. It's been very helpful.
Happy 4th of July.
All right, thank you. Now, thank you. You did a wonderful job with your presentation.
Yeah, we have to vote on it.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. All right.
No, we did not vote.
So, Mr. Nicanello moves.
Second.
Mr. Martin seconds to allow the continuance from the board, for further board meeting on August 8, 2019. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And gentlemen, lady, please, we have other business to do, so if you could keep your roar to a minimum, we'd appreciate it.
What do we...
Step in.
Okay, so I had thought that we had put on, first of all, we do have minutes that we need to approve, and I know everybody's looked at those minutes, and perhaps we could just approve them en masse. Everybody's looked at them, right?
Yep.
And
I'll
decided.
make a motion, we approve the minutes in bulk.
Second.
Second came first from Mr. Martin. Thank you, Mr. Barron. Unfortunately, we can't take your second
That's
anyway
true.
tonight.
That's true.
All
You're
those in
right.
favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 That carries unanimously. One more matter that I believe was added to the agenda. One matter that was added to the agenda is, I prepared a decision, and that decision is on the jet ski facility. That decision was, I believe, circulated to all of you. The decision, I thought, was completely in agreement with what we had discussed that night in my notes, and if my notes were inaccurate or inadequate, I certainly want to apologize. But have each of you seen the emails that we have received from the petitioner or the parasail company in particular?
It was just Tom, yourself, and Dick, right? Was that on the, Sean didn't?
I didn't.
John didn't sit on it.
I didn't sit on it.
Okay, so we rendered a decision in that, and I'm really speaking now to you, Dick, you, Tom, and you, Tom. Before I changed the decision, you might have actually seen, to accommodate what they suggest were the inaccuracies of the decision. In other words, file an amended decision. I didn't want to do that without you all being aware of it, the people that voted on it that night. So have you seen the email, Dick?
There's everything in there. That's the,
That's the one there, yeah.
Actually, I'm just seeing it.
What would you like us to do, Mr. Chairman?
I'm just wondering, I'm not looking for anything other than an affirmation that you all agree with me. I can change it to reflect what the changes that they say were inaccurately taken down as conditions. And it deals primarily with the use and storage of gasoline.
Right.
And I know that was a hot topic, a hot button topic. I thought we had just come to an agreement that what was going to happen is we were going to incorporate the fire department's suggestions or concerns into our decision. That's what I did. They're indicating, wait a minute, we talked about other things, and now that's at odds with what we're doing. What they're doing, I think, fits squarely in with the decision, but you know, that's fine. I don't mind modifying it a bit, but I don't want to do that without the approval of the 4 people that have already looked at it and approved it that night. So, again, we can look at it. They did tell us this that night, that it's not just 21 gallons a day that will go to the site, and in fact, it doesn't even go to 21 gallons. It's 18 gallons contained within 3 separate 6-gallon tanks, and that they do refill those tanks throughout the day with a runner going to the gasoline station. So in total, it is more than 21 gallons that are at that site on any given day. But it's not really the case because there's only 18 that are sitting in cans, which was our concern. Secondly, they had a concern about the, I'm not really sure I fully get it, but another concern about the way I wrote it, and I'm happy to modify it to accommodate their concerns. They've also asked, can they go into business? Is it okay that they start up a business? I emailed that to Sandy today, my response to that latest afternoon thing. This has been a real difficult path getting here. So my response to that was, so the board knows, that they wanted to know if we could they go ahead and go into business, and my answer to that is, I'm not giving them legal advice.
You don't.
We're not here to give them legal
You
advice.
don't have the authority to do that.
They go do whatever they think they should do that's appropriate, and by the law, if they want us to modify that decision to accommodate these small changes that, frankly, I don't think need to be changed, but that's okay, then I'm happy to do it, but I don't want to do it without the approval of you, Mr. Martin, you, Mr. Nicanello, and you, Mr. Barron. Do I have your approval for that?
You do.
So make those
yes, sir.
changes, and that,
Yes,
we
sir.
move to adjourn, right?
Where's the parasail?
It's down at Skippy's.
We move to adjourn, and I hear a second?
Joint second, yeah.
All right.
Restart, or we?
Pardon me?
No, those actually would be, if you want to, if I could just chime in, I know it wasn't there, but you do it one of 2 ways. You either reconvene the board to have a formal hearing, or
I just
you
simply
considered it